everyone. Welcome to the modern... Sorry, go ahead. I always jump the gun.
Welcome, everyone. The event is now live. John, please take it away.
I'm very excited about this summit, as you can tell. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Cloud Data Protection Summit. Today's event was organized by the hardworking folks at Virtualization and Cloud Review and Redmond Magazine, and who have brought together some of the best independent experts on today's topic. And thanks to our sponsors, Druva, Metallic, Clumio, and AvePoint for making this happen. And thanks to you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief at Application Development Trends, and I'll be your moderator for the first of 3 information-packed sessions. But before we get underway, I need to go over a few housekeeping details. Each of today's sessions is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way within the next few days. Each of today's sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. You can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Please feel free to add your questions as they occur to you throughout the summit. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Our sponsors have provided some excellent resources that can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. Be sure to take a moment to check those out. And last but not least, at the end of the 3rd session, one lucky attendee will be receiving a Surface Pro. A Surface Pro 7, as a matter of fact, Microsoft's ultralight tablet featuring a laptop-class Intel Core processor, all-day battery, and HD cameras. But you must be present to win, so stick with us. And now it's on to our first session, Top 10 Threats to your cloud data in 2021. For this session, we've called on Ian Thornton-Trump, Chief Information Officer at Cyjax. Ian is an ITIL certified IT professional with 25 years experience in IT security and information technology. From 1989 to 1992, Ian served with the Canadian Military Intelligence Branch. He joined the military again in 2002 and served as the CF Military Police Reserves and retired as a public affairs officer in 2013. After a year with the RCMP as a criminal intelligence analyst, Ian worked as a cybersecurity analyst / consultant for multinational insurance, banking, and regional healthcare. Today, as CISO for Cyjax, say that 3 times real fast, Ian applies his deep experience with the threats facing small, medium, and large enterprises. His research and experience have made him a sought-after cybersecurity consultant specializing in cyber threat intelligence programs for these businesses. In his spare time, he teaches cybersecurity and IT business courses for CompTIA as part of his global faculty and as part of the global faculty and as the lead architect for Cyber Titan, Canada's efforts to encourage the next generation of cyber professionals. You are truly in for a great session. Take it away, Ian.
Thank you so much, John. I'm incredibly excited to be back, doing this thing and talking about cloud because it is such a huge issue that all businesses now are really faced with, right? Like we used to think, it was enterprise, it was a big enterprise move. Not anymore. Cloud is now, I think, ever present in any business, large or small. So this is why these kind of sessions are so relevant. And, I want to thank the sponsors, too, for letting me talk about what I want to talk about today. So, there's a couple of things that I really want to point out is that cloud changed the paradigm around change management, specifically in businesses, right? And we know from our vast experiences and looking at ITIL and other frameworks that change management is a huge factor in the success or failure of different business transformation projects. So it's not surprising that, we see these new challenges on the horizon, and a lot of times the change management aspect is one of the hardest ones to bite off. Because what cloud introduces amongst a whole bunch of things that we're going to get into in this particular webinar, of course, but it is a fundamental difference in ownership. It is a fundamental difference in support and business workflows. And so you can imagine that if you're introducing that much change into an organization, a radical transformation is kind of required. So when I looked at this particular webinar, I wanted to back away a little bit from the traditional cloud security webinar, of the top 10, crazy hacker threats, right? I really wanted to look at some of the fundamental problems that I see with cloud and adoption of cloud technologies. And, of course, there's a lot of good solutions out there, many offered, and certainly by our sponsors, but a lot of the problems that I see in cloud adoption doesn't necessarily come from a technological place, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So when I look at what the threats are, it's your very own organization, the internal capabilities to execute, support, and secure a cloud project, right? I think that's one of the things that we could admit, very much like, when you're going through a breakup, it's not me, it's not you, it's just the situation, So we make a lot of excuses within an organization, I think, when it comes to cloud projects and cloud project management. So we're going to explore some of those in this webinar today. Also going to talk, of course, about the flamboyant and relentless cyber criminal capability to attack organizations' endpoint and cloud infrastructure. So I want to point out that, when you look at cloud security, it's not really actually anything super special. From a technological perspective, it is, but generally, the same approach that we've taken to cybersecurity since cybersecurity became a thing requires leadership to align people, process, and technology to the business objectives. That has not changed. Unfortunately, we, in a lot of cases, are still using the same technology that we've always used to execute a project, right? A giant spreadsheet with a whole bunch of information on it, right? So, I kind of look at that, and I mean, everybody, gets a spreadsheet. I think it's kind of hilarious because it seems like on a lot of calls that I've been, that is both the tool and the solution. And in a lot of cases, that's not really the easiest way to manage a whole bunch of deliverables. And so one of the fundamental things that you can think about is how are we going to manage a project to success when there's a lot of different stakeholders, right? When you look at an internal project for a particular department, it was easy to do. You sit down with the business leaders from the accounting department, you sit down with the application owners, and you sit down with the IT service delivery, and it's all within the same house with all the same ground rules, and no one needs NDAs to have a meaningful conversation. So one of the issues around cloud is, where's that demarcation between, the inside of your organization and that outside provider? And that, to me, is one of the fundamental aspects that needs to get sorted before you even start talking about security, right? Now, this is where, a big gap in a lot of organizations is to really talk about intelligence when it comes to baking in the security. Because if you don't have an appropriate budget for the things that you're going to need to secure the cloud, you will bake in actual cloud security failure, right? Like, it makes sense, right? If, for instance, you're trying to move and migrate a bunch of servers and applications into the cloud, but you don't have a budget to pen test them once they get there, that's a problem, right? Because then now you are letting either a ransomware crew or a well-meaning and slightly deranged security professional to tell you about your vulnerabilities that you've now established and opened wide to the internet. So again, this is where, from a perspective of a leader in the organization, you need to ask questions, and we'll talk about what some of those critical questions are as well. The other problem that you may have in your organization is, are you cloud ready from a technology perspective? That's another key point. And what I mean technology perspective is, how are you going to consume the telemetry? How are you going to ensure that you are protecting those new cloud resources in the team, in the cloud that you've put there? The other problem, and I was getting ahead of myself a little bit there, is really understanding the security teams. Are you guys ready to deal with a cloud scenario? Are you even ready to work with a SaaS provider if there's some sort of indication that there could have been a data breach or could have been some sort of problem? So all of these things combine at the project level before we've even gone live. So again, this is where I talk about security leadership with cloud projects or really any other project within the organization, is the security team and the security leader needs to get in front of the procurement process. It needs to get in front of that business digital transformation. Otherwise, it will be the cleanup crew for the business transformation, right? And I know I've had a lot of experience seeing where projects come off the rails because of pure budgetary problems, not related to any of the technology stack, but just things that people hadn't thought about and need some guidance on. So I put this slide in here, and it's not meant to be insulting or anything like that, but never underestimate the power of your own incompetence. But this isn't to be mean or to suggest that any of you are incompetent, but it is a very powerful way of getting the message across to your organization that if you haven't been trained in the art of cloud or cloud security or even are new to the idea of cloud projects, you're going to be incredibly challenged because you are incompetent at it. You've had no training. You have had no guidance. Now, when I go back to the idea of talking about cloud projects and talking about reducing the risk of failure or reducing the security service, that budget becomes very important because the security team may need experts. It may need people that are trained appropriately in the technologies that you're going to deploy. And so one of the things to understand is to accept the fact that you don't know enough to do this particularly safely, and hopefully build a circle of trust with your management when you do talk to them about your need for training or resources to get off on the right foot. So one of the most important internal capability failures, if you will, is, again, harping on something I've already mentioned a few times, but that's failure to estimate infrastructure and delivery costs of cloud projects, okay? Now, where a lot of these things falls apart is when you look at what is actually being provided and what the costs and what is included in the tin. But once you start asking some questions around, the bandwidth, the storage, the compute, the security options, the backup and data retention options, the ability to get the logs, for instance, all of that stuff in cloud does usually add additional costs, right? Not to mention solutions that are going to be far less cumbersome and drive efficiency into your business. And this is where you might know an awful lot about backing up systems on premise. In fact, all of us that go back, to 20 or 25 years ago, we're dealing with, tape storage, we're dealing with Veritas that then became Symantec, et cetera. And we understood how that all worked. But when you fast forward to cloud and when you're dealing with things like SQL as a service, as opposed to a box running SQL, it's an entirely different paradigm, right? If you're dealing with a development shop and load balancers and all sorts of other technology, there's certain skill sets and requirements needed to make all of that work. Now, obviously, if you talk about the technological costs, you then look at the actual delivery costs, right? Far too many times a cloud project and the security around that cloud project has that baked-in failure because adequate money wasn't allocated to the actual delivery costs, right? That can include things like support team training, audit and compliance, assurance to your own organization that you're not actually introducing new and vulnerabilities, especially vulnerabilities that you may not have an adequate mitigation control for. That, an architecture review or any sort of third-party consulting. I think it's absolutely brilliant to start at the very beginning and get involved in the ground floor so that you do have some budget set aside, not just the project contingency, which all too often becomes the main route of funding all of these things that were missed, right? Now, I've talked about the importance of questions around scope, right? one of the things that's absolutely huge, I think, and is commonly missed is, why are we doing this cloud project, okay? This is an important thing, because if the business values the project and has a vested interest in having it succeed, then you need to get to the front of the line, and if you have to push and shove your way, I'd recommend that. But you need to understand that if this is a critical business transformation project, then there should be some flexibility and budget available for your team to be able to do it successfully. You know, let's not get confused about whose responsibility the data is. It's always your responsibility as an organization, okay? No matter what you've heard about the shared responsibility audit relationship, the reality is your organization is responsible. The idea of blaming a third party for your own failings to keep that sensitive data is not likely to go over particularly well in any regulated industry, especially when it comes to things like the GDPR in the UK and EU and the California data privacy and emerging data privacy legislations, not to mention the New York State Financial Services, who are all essentially pointing the finger and saying, no, sir, your organization is responsible for data security. So one of the key tasks of data security is, of course, how are we going to implement encryption at rest and encryption in transit? These are two fundamental ways that we can keep our data, our sensitive data, from, I would say, being a regulatory level infraction if that data is compromised. Because if it's encrypted at rest and encrypted in transit and you've stored the keys safely, then all the bad guys have is nonsense that they can't actually use. But there are some caveats to encryption, and we'll talk a little bit about how that plays out as we move through this, right? Again, huge issues with some types of data being stored in places that may not be allowable. So that is another issue that needs to be addressed as well. And this is the one that I think is critical for success, because it really involves how much money, time, and effort you're going to have to spend in that gray area of supporting a new solution while maintaining an old solution. Because your workload essentially will double as a security team and as an IT delivery team. Because if you're running two solutions at the same time, of course, there's going to be double the work usually, right? And again, issues around data retention and data deletion. If your organization is blessed with a data retention policy, it doesn't like magically disappear when you move to a cloud service provider or when you engage and buy a SaaS solution. And a lot of folks might be interested to know that the default settings for deletion on Office 365, for instance, are not particularly friendly if, in terms of like if you are served with a production order or for data that perhaps might be a couple of years old. If you don't have a data archiving policy with regards to some employees, there can be a huge liability attached to your inability to produce documents. And unfortunately, we live in a world where, in that particular litigative situation, if you don't have any evidence to refute the claim that's being brought to you, it could go very seriously in the wrong direction for your organization. And then again, the internal capability. How many amongst all of the folks that have been working in cloud, have an identity and access management solution, are comfortable with a backup for the cloud production data, have implemented multi-factor authentication and SSO, right? Are comfortable with load balancing and firewalling technologies, understand how to gather cloud data into SIEM, deploy a web application firewall, and even configure and deploy a content delivery network, right? And then, of course, there's the question of something anti-malware, right? Just because you've gone into the cloud and you've taken your version of Unix and you've put it up in the cloud doesn't magically fix any of the vulnerabilities that might be present. We'll talk about the challenges of vulnerability management in the cloud in a moment. My number one rule is threat model before implementing security controls, never the reverse, right? You don't want to be sitting around understanding that because of this particular digital transformation project, you've opened up these huge vulnerabilities in your organization, and you're now going to have to go cap in hand to your leadership to try and get some cashola to fix the problem, right? Be in front of the problem and be upfront about it and say, listen, our current firewall, our current SIEM, and our current backup solutions are inadequate. We need to go to tender and get some specific technologies in order for me to assure the business that, we can actually recover should something go wrong, right? Right. So number 4 on my list is failure to realize that a change in the technology will require a change in people and process, right? And I say this because one of the strategies around cloud, especially when you go to SaaS, right, is to business as usual, as I like to see, or BAU, the application owner becoming responsible for provisioning and providing access, okay? Now, in a lot of organizations, right, the access control is done by the management or the IT team or an application delivery team. It is not left to a non-technical user for very good reasons, right? And so it's difficult without a good solution in place to deal with, onboarding levers and role-based authentication controls and to manage those if you're a non-technical person. So one of the things that I like to always say is that the identity and access management single source of truth is the payroll department, and that SSO with multi-factor authentication for cloud-based technologies is truly the way to go, all right? Because if you tie the human resources payroll department, automate that into something like Active Directory, then you can be assured that when you disable a user in your Active Directory, that user is disabled from all of the cloud provisioning and accounts that you have. And that, when you combine that with a usage report from your cloud provider, it can then tell you about stale accounts that you can remove. And in a lot of cases, that could save the organization money. And that's the one way that you can sell the idea of SSO MFA for a new cloud project or a new cloud solution, is that ultimately it'll not only give you that assurance that when a lever is going through the access control piece, that the data that you're acting on is accurate, right? And that becomes incredibly important. All right, and here's my one joke, Saad, right? That what people need to understand in cloud security projects or IT projects in general, right, is that the stakeholders include compliance, security, audit, and IT ops, right? That's critical. If somehow you're not a stakeholder on a project charter and there's a digital transformation cloud project going on, this is a huge problem for the security and for the IT team. Because, in a lot of cases, they may be the last to know that something like this is going on, and the implications of that from an audit and compliance perspective are a bit chilling, because the last thing you want to do is get a cloud data breach happening and the IT department and managers and the security team are unaware that there was actually company data or company assets in that particular instance. So again, this is why you have to insert yourself early into that process. Get to know the PMO. It's another little snippet that I can leave you with there. Okay. Now we're going to pivot a bit, and we're going to talk about the cyber criminals, okay, and how they are going to come at your organization. So the first thing is they have all the tools, okay? So they have all the tools to attack because most of them are free, okay, and downloadable. And your tools are going to cost you money, right, in general. I'm not saying there aren't free tools that you can use on the blue team side, but I'm just going to say the type of stuff that you can get out of Kali, for instance, dwarfs what's available from a blue team perspective. Okay, and we can debate that, but I'm just saying that your attackers are going to come with the latest and greatest tool sets. And if you haven't identified a specific need for specific tools to guard the data in a cloud instance or in a SaaS application, you could be in very serious trouble, right? And this is what I'm talking about when we talk about a cloud attack surface, right? All of the OWASP 10, right? That list of the 10 terrible things that vulnerabilities that are commonly found in web applications. API security. The security on the storage buckets where you're offloading stuff. I mean, just today, there are millions of records that have been exposed by companies as a result of poor security on storage buckets. And folks are using storage buckets to put databases that are ever increasing in size, or copies of databases as a backup strategy. Not a bad idea, but if the security on those storage buckets has been degraded because your application can't support, an encrypted connection for that particular backup, you're running the risk of exposing a backup copy of your live data to the bad guys, right? And again, when you look at that technology, when you look at what's available, it can be daunting if you're new to Azure, if you're new to Amazon infrastructure. Understand what an access control list is, understand what a poorly configured security group is. And I harp on this because access control lists are like that kind of final step before everything goes wrong. So as an example, if you have a security group and you're controlling access, the only way that security group knows who you are is when you put in who you are into the login, right? If you're still doing user ID and password, which far too many people are and haven't properly implemented SSH keys. But say, for instance, you have your user in a security group and you're preventing, you're allowing that user level permissions into the app. Okay, great. All right? And let's assume for a moment it's not protected by multi-factor authentication. All right? The problem with just using a security group for control is that if there is a vulnerability in what that person is logging into, so say the SSH daemon has a vulnerability in it that can be exploited, right? And it's come out in the latest edition of Metasploit, all of a sudden you're popped, right? And the folks have now user-level access, and now they can start exploring either lateral movement or privilege escalation, okay? Access control lists allow you to define what, for instance, range of IP addresses are even allowed to get to that service that's exposed. So it's in a way, it's a bit of a dam, if you will. So rather than having your vulnerable daemon exposed to the entire internet, you're at least controlling who can get to that daemon and attempt to exploit it, right? So the combination of the two is critical. Now, the other thing that we have here is vulnerability management explodes with cloud, especially when you're migrating on-premise stuff into the cloud, because you have to start thinking around now about, okay, we had mitigative technology in place because we knew this particular application had some vulnerabilities. If that mitigative technology doesn't scale or can't be used in the cloud because it's a hardware on-premise device, right, then you have a problem because you're putting an application that you know is vulnerable into the cloud where it may not have the same protections, right? We've got to protect our repos. Many companies have fallen to the supply chain attack vector where malicious code is inserted into the repo, which is then sent off to the build and deployed in production. That is a bad day. So we've got to look at that as an attack surface. Rendering applications, like for instance PHP, that is used to present the web page, right? So those kind of technologies need to be ensured that we are using the latest versions or a hardened version of an older version of, say, PHP as an example. The content management system. So you might be using something like WordPress or Drupal, or God forbid, Internet Information Services with Front Page, or even older stuff like, God forbid, it's a Silverlight application or Dreamweaver. Anyways, a mess. The CMS also has particular vulnerabilities. Back in the day, even back around as far as 2014, 2015, we saw attacks on Silverlight and applications that could be pawned via Silverlight exploits, right? The operating system, okay? In some cases, the operating system may be separate from the hypervisor itself. In some cases, the hypervisor and the operating system are one and the same, like ESXi, for instance, right? And then we have the actual hardware, firmware, and BIOS. Now, in a lot of cases, the hardware, firmware, and BIOS are like not something that you can scope for because it's in a data center and that's looked after, in quotations, by the provider. So again, you have to be aware and cognizant of that particular attack surface. So vulnerability management in the cloud, folks, is a whole new ballgame, and it's a lot different when you already have physical controls and mitigations in place, but now you're going to have to look at virtual solutions in order to get the same level of protection. Right. So this slide is meant to identify the fact that there are lots of tools out there available to hackers, but they're also available to you. Okay, so you can actually download these and run them against your own applications to figure out, are we in deep trouble? Do we need mitigative controls? Do we need to scale mitigative controls up into the cloud, right? So all of these are available. I would suggest that you look at, someone, especially QA department, you can gamify, a number of days before a critical vulnerability or a severe vulnerability was found in production. You can do some great stuff by using all of these tools that the hackers are going to use against you anyways to secure and get a good feeling about your infrastructure, right? And so when you think about the cyber criminal capability, it's not like they're just coming after your cloud infrastructure. They will be coming after your organization in a variety of different ways, right? So they might get into your on-premise network and pivot onto a workstation that has cloud access, right? They might start with your applications that you've recently put into the cloud by scanning them. I see hundreds of attacks per day on WordPress sites through the WordFence plugin, for instance. And so I know that these sites are getting hit by, in some cases, bots, sometimes in more sophisticated ways as well. But you have to understand that the attack surface includes both that on-premise network and that cloud network and the connection in between, right? Now, cyber criminal capability to attack an organization's cloud infrastructure doesn't even require tools. Okay? You're thinking, well, Ian, you just spent a whole bunch of time telling me about all these tools that the hackers have that we should maybe try and do. But yes, it's 100% true, but you've got other problems, right? You got 99 problems, and cloud security is 99 of them. Gray hat warfare, for instance. Look to see if you've got storage buckets exposed. Query your own company's name to see if somebody else has you exposed because they're storing data about your company in an insecure fashion. I did that for a large financial institution that I work for, and we found a couple of our supply chain providers, construction company, that had all sorts of invoices from us publicly available. I'm not saying that's like a major security problem, but I'll tell you, it's a great way to phish. It's a great way to take one of those invoices, change it a little bit, send it into the accounts payable with a note saying, "Oh, our banking information has been changed. Could you please update it to this?" And all of a sudden, a couple grand, maybe even more, has gone out of the system. There was this one dude that made a fortune because he registered a company with a name very similar to, I think it was MicroSolutions. He sent invoices to Google and Facebook for like tens of thousands of dollars, and Google and Facebook and other major companies just paid them, right? No verification, no nothing, because it was like under a certain threshold. And so, yeah, it was just like, oh, we'll just pay it. Turns out he managed to scrape out millions from these companies, and he was eventually caught in some Eastern European country. Now, recently, I was in Forbes, and I had the great privilege of contributing to an article by Davey Winder, and you should follow Davey on Twitter. Happy Geek is his handle. But this was really about buying access to your network. So not only have we talked about like the exploitation, but under the we don't even need some stinking tools to hack you, there are a lot of dark web vendors out there that are selling access to particular corporate domains, and it's big business, folks. It is a huge, huge business online where some user accounts can go for tens of thousands of dollars, especially if they've verified that there's still access to them, they're not protected by multi-factor authentication, and they might be elevated privileges. So you really have to be on top of the user account management, your specific requirements around multi-factor authentication, which stops this attack pretty much dead cold. So really this is another attack vector against your cloud that you do have to be aware of and take the appropriate action for. So number 5, right, on my list is the cyber criminal capability to attack an organization's cloud infrastructure may include production, staging, development, and the repo. And the question for you defenders is, are all of those equally protected by the same level of mitigated controls, right? And this is really important because if, for instance, I'll tell you a quick story about an application that the test environment was on one box, but the production environment was on 27 boxes in clusters. And everybody was like freaking out because it didn't work in production, but it worked in dev, right? 2 words, inter-process communication. That might have been 3 words. But the idea is here is if everything works in dev and nothing seems to work in production, is because the boxes in production are not connecting to each other properly. Because on the same box, if the whole dev environment is in one same box, it will inter-process communicate instead of trying to communicate box to box. And there are a whole host of things that can go wrong when you start talking about box to box. And it comes back to things like DNS, it comes back to what version of TLS are you running, and all of these different things. So it's really important that when you start about dealing with things like development environments, staging environments, and production environments, that where you're doing your development work closely mirrors what the production environment is like, right? And again, because now you might have 2 or 3 times the headache, you're going to need more security tools or licenses for your existing tools to accommodate those things with the same level of security that you're providing your production environment, right? Yeah, cool. So I got some other areas that I just wanted to talk about in terms of where cloud security may fail you and things might slip through your fingers, right? I talk about a gray area of cloud threats being compliance, right? And this is because a lot of what is going on in a business in terms of digital transformation needs to still adhere to the policies and procedures and threat models that you have. And the guardians of that are your compliance and audit team. So, one of the questions to ask, and even an ally that you can get in the room when you're talking about this cloud project is, do we have the right logging? How are we doing the retention and security of those logs, right? Do we have a certain level of indemnification? Third-party risk is a huge thing right now, folks. And in the terms and conditions, you'll find that a lot of the cloud security vendors or cloud vendors are coming back to you, and they're trying to make the indemnification basically, well, the only thing you can really do is sue us for the cost of the service that we're providing, right? And so your risk team, your compliance team, your corporate lawyers may be very uncomfortable with that. So that's also something to bring up. The issues of data transfer and data sovereignty are always, on people's minds. The data subject access request, or DSAR, under the GDPR, and the right to erasure. In a lot of cases, sometimes SaaS applications are pretty notorious for retaining all the data forever or getting rid of it super quickly. Neither solution is particularly good if you have a regulatory requirement or if your legal team, for instance, needs to have access to that information should they have to fend off litigation, right? And then also, again, it comes down to that checklist of, do we have antivirus running on our stuff? How are we going to even checkmark that box if we're using a serverless architecture, right? Food for thought. You're going to need mitigated controls that you can put in front of that. And then, the other area too is that shared responsibility model that really needs to figure it out. Are you going to get access to Microsoft Azure's internal audit findings? No, you're absolutely not, right? You have to ask them for permission. I know you have to do for Amazon. If you're even going to pen test something, you have in your own instance, right? So continue that. And I've heard of businesses that get all excited, they buy a great product and then they launch that to cloud infrastructure and they're locked out of all their apps. Because Amazon, you didn't give them the heads up, and if they got lucky and they saw this telemetry coming at them, they decided, oh, you're under attack. I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to shut down this attack. Well, yeah, but at the same time, if you ran it from your own corporate IP address, you may have just shut down the entire app, even though you meant well. Right, so it's something to have a discussion around. How are we going to do that? How are we going to incorporate the cloud security apps or the cloud apps that we have in our annual pen test? Right, if you run one. Third-party audit, another huge area too. It's like you won't be able to hire a third-party auditor to go in and do something in Azure's or Amazon data centers, right? They're not going to allow you to come in and take a look-see, physical inspection or anything like that. So, that's another area where, you're going to have to be some flexible. And of course, I talked about the vulnerability management, who does what when, and how do I get assurance that the service provider has kept things up to the latest date, right? And then so one of the biggest myths, and I see the key takeaway from this particular presentation is really around the idea that we've looked at cloud from the eyes of it's like using someone else's computer, right? That is completely wrong, okay? Because it is not someone else's computer from the perspective of the data that is going to be in that environment, right? So again, moving an application that's vulnerable to the cloud without any additional precautions doesn't magically fix vulnerabilities, right? If one of your security measures, and this happens all the time, is that server or that application doesn't have direct access to the internet, and that has been sort of recorded in the annuals of your company's history, and that has been the security thing that you have forgotten about, and then all of a sudden you push that thing up into the cloud, and I can take a run at it with with something like ZAP and find all of these SQL injection vulnerabilities. All of a sudden you've exploded the attack surface of your organization, right? So make sure the apps that you need to put into the cloud are secure and are not just relying on the internal infrastructure to keep that data safe, right? The other issue is the complexity of development and management of cloud. This is where you may not even have, especially if you're in the early stages of digital transformation, DevOps or DevSecOps staff that you're actually going to need, right? One of the best practices is segregate the dev functions from the operational production functions and have that layer of DevOps in between. And if you are allowing your devs to have access to the production environment, that can be a red flag for many companies that are very concerned about that separation of duties, right? And then again, understanding that everything costs something. So if you get breached and you have terabytes of data exfiltrated from your organization, you're actually paying for the privilege of having those hackers take all of your data, So sometimes one of the best security mechanisms is to have caps on how much you're spending, so that if something is happening, that cap could be hit, and then all of a sudden the access is suspended, and you're sent a note saying you're $150 or $250 dollars over your standard authorized payment. Please get in touch with us right away, right? So there are some actual security controls that you can put in place to detect shenanigans or a heist, if you will, before it occurs. And then finally, again, just because you've put it into the cloud does not magically protect your sensitive data from attack across that entire attack surface, and you have to be diligent when it comes to understanding that your development environment is possibly a more tempting target than the actual production environment for a lot of reasons, including supply chain type of attacks and compromise. And with that, we are at 45-minute mark, so we have some time for some Q&A. And I want to thank once again our sponsors and John Waters for having the helm today.
Hey, thanks, Ian. And wow, I didn't think it was possible to pack that much information into a 45-minute session. That was amazing.
It was the coffee.
But well, luckily we still have time for some of those questions from our attendees. Remember, folks, you can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll do our best to get to all of them. So we'll get our first question here. Bailey from Austin asks, says, I'm a bit confused at the idea of cloud security and encryption in transit. What do you mean everything is clear text after the load balancer?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So traditionally what has happened in a lot of web applications, and there's sort of pros and cons to this, so hear me out. So the first problem that we have is the issues of encryption, right? And so everything, every web application has to be HTTPS. But behind the scenes, in order to understand what's going on there, it usually is terminated at the load balancer and then might go into like a cluster of web servers and a cluster of database servers. And a lot of times it's clear text past the load balancer. So one of the major vulnerabilities that came out was when F5 had a bunch of vulnerabilities the bad guys could get into. They could then see the data streams on the other side of the F5 load balancer, which of course unencrypted. And they were unencrypted, and of course that's how you could scoop up a bunch of potentially sensitive data like credit card information and stuff like that. So one of the best practices is to terminate encryption at the load balancer, re-encrypt potentially to the application server, and of course, depending on what type of database software you're using, encrypt from that application server back to the database. Some folks implement this using IPsec. You can also do it using VLAN technology, but the idea here is that you really want to try and encrypt all the way through that connection. And so it is an architecture change, and it brings up its own problems about versions of TLS that are being used to do that communication between boxes or even backend to the database. So again, my best recommendation around that confusion is to really get on some of those courses that Azure and Amazon offer that are specific to developers looking to implement security in the actual layers of an application, and that'll help a long way in designing the correct implementation that you need.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to, so David from Sacramento asks, do you have any comments on keeping Git repos clean?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is another thing, like your private Git, if you're using Git and you have a private repo, that's up to you. But what's interesting now is some of the technology that like Google and Git are putting in is they're actively now scanning for oopsies. And by oopsies, I mean putting a private key, for instance, up on Git, but be aware that their scanning isn't nearly as fast as the cyber criminals can be when it comes to that. But also tools that are going to analyze your code within your repositories for particular vulnerabilities or known sort of developmental lapses or issues. But one of the things it can't do is, for instance, it can't tell you that your overall approach to the application design should have really been built around the idea of parameterized input as opposed to putting filters in front of all of the inputs that you have to your web application. So some of it is like, do a secure software development course like one from Immersive Labs, who I'm really good friends with, but there's lots of others out there. But also relying on your own DSAT and SAT testing, via other products and stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, the development department needs to be able to put its hand up and say, listen, we got training, we got tools, we're trying to build the most secure application we have. Then it goes to QA for some basic hygiene testing and smoke testing, but DevOps really needs to own the layers below it, right? Because as we talked about it's this huge layer cake, and you could have the most secure code, ever built running on, the top layer of your infrastructure, but if you haven't patched it appropriately against, some of the common exploits that are out there, then you're still as vulnerable, right?
Fascinating. Okay, so Kitty from Houston observes that you didn't really stress the importance of endpoint cybersecurity hygiene.
No.
And she wonders, do you have any thoughts on that as it relates to cloud attackers?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't sort of on purpose, but I will say this. In most of the cases that I've read where we've had like really good play-by-play what happened, right? The attack vector was a service that was exposed by the business or a third-party service that allowed lateral movement into the host network to find the goodies to then exfiltrate them. So you're 100% correct in that endpoint security and multi-factor authentication and, of course, something like EDR technologies and SIM technologies are equally important to defend your boxes that have access or privileged access to the cloud environment. Because we see it going both ways. Attackers attacking what's in the cloud, but also attackers attacking the actual infrastructure that's on-premise, right? And then laterally moving into the cloud where all the goodness is. So Kitty's right, definitely a part of your threat model.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've got one here. Natasha from Cleveland says, I laughed at your story. Dev is one box, production is 27 boxes. How come it does not work in production? And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the specific reason was two things. One, the application, it was a .NET application. It needed to have specific lines of code to force TLS 1.2. And of course, the database server, and the front end, all Microsoft infrastructure had to have the latest patches for, I think it was the C++ distribution library, as well as the .NET frameworks, right? And because these things were at different patch levels, some boxes would communicate okay, and others you couldn't get at them at all. So again, it's like synchronized swimming. If everything is working, it's beautiful. But if one person is out of tune, it looks like a disaster, right? And that is very true with these kind of situations where you have a dev environment that is not, almost an exact mirror of the production environment.
Okay, we've got Alan, and he's asking, how would you suggest encrypting SSD backups when replicating across slow, wide area networks in real time, say from US to France and vice versa? All of this to ensure complete reconstruction to any platform in any location, specifically after ransomware or other security breach.
Right. So, so I'm a little confused on the use case, but let's kind of look at it this way. If I was, say, an Azure tenant in Toronto, and I wanted to replicate my database back into Germany, I would do it cloud to cloud, right? Now, from what is saying here, if this is an on-premise solution and we want to use cloud as a backup, there are technologies that do really good compression. That initial seed, though, of, say, anything over 500 gigabytes to a terabyte, you do on a portable drive, and then you send it to the provider and say, this is my initial seed, and then you just do differential backups from that SSD that you have up to the cloud. Because if you try to push terabytes of data up to the cloud through a slow WAN link, everybody in your organization will hate, okay? And they'll want to kill you, especially if it's done at the end of a quarter or at the end of the month when all of the sales and marketing team are trying to make their numbers. They will find you and they will kill you. So what I would suggest is really look at an architecture that allows you to go and move that data in the fastest links possible, and those links are usually cloud to cloud.
Fascinating. Okay, same attendee wonders, how would you suggest encrypting SSD backups? I don't know. Sorry, he already asked that one, but he's got another one. What about dedupe options?
Yeah, well, that is kind of a no-brainer because that is part of any sort of good modern cloud backup solution, Acronis or any of the other ones that are out there, or Veeam. They are all doing deduplication because don't forget, those providers, they pay for bandwidth to store your data, right? They pay the bill for you to pull down your data from those. So deduplication is super important. And again, this comes back to sort of those fundamentals for project and cloud success. Get rid of that old data. You do not need the Christmas list from 2013. Look at an archiving solution as opposed to just a backup solution and reduce that amount of operational data. And I'll tell you, I did some consulting and looked at the ratio of operational data to just data that hadn't been touched in a year. And we found that 70% or so of our total backup of terabytes, by the way, was just data that hadn't been touched in a year. Right? Now, I'm not saying you immediately delete everything that's older than a year. I'm not saying that at all. But what you can do is start a data archiving process to pull as much of that old data off, live platters, archive it away. If you need it for litigation or if you need it for regulatory investigation or regulatory action, then you have it, But for God's sakes, stop real-time backing up all of that data that really isn't even relevant to the business operation.
Fascinating. Thank you, Ian, so much. That's all the time, all the questions we have time for right now. I want to thank our presenter, Ian Thornton Trump, Chief Information Security Officer at Syjax, for a great presentation, and our sponsors, Druva, Metallic, Clumio, and AvePoint, for making it possible. We're going to take a short break and be back at the top of the hour for our second session, Modern Best Practices for Cloud Data Protection, Collaboration, and Compliance, led by the inimitable Howard Cohen, Senior Resultant at the Tech Channel Partners Results Group, and moderated by my colleague, David Rammel, Editor-in-Chief of Virtualization and Cloud Review. I've moderated sessions with Howard before, so I know you're in for another good one. Now would be a great time to check out those resources on your console provided by our sponsors. And remember, during today's third session, we will be giving away a Microsoft Surface Pro 7, but you must be present to win, so stay tuned.
Welcome, everyone. The event is now live. David, please take it away.
Okay, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our speakers, my fellow moderators, and of course our sponsors, Druva, Metallic, Clumio, and AvePoint, for underwriting the summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. I'm David Ramo, editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, and I'm here to moderate the second session of our Modern Cloud Data Protection Summit, dealing with collaboration and compliance. Our speaker for this session is Howard Cohen, Senior Resultant at the Tech Channel Partners Results Group. He is a 35-plus year executive veteran of the information technology industry who today writes for and about the IT Channel. He's a frequent speaker at IT industry events that include Microsoft Inspire, Citrix Energy/Summit, ConnectWise IT Nation, and many others. And he frequently hosts and presents webinars for many vendors and publications. Howard, it's great to have you here. The stage is all yours.
Thank you, David. And welcome, everybody. I'm sitting here feeling so inimitable. I want to thank John Waters for the kind words at the end of last session. Okay, we're here today to talk about modern best practices for cloud data protection, collaboration, and compliance. This session will be more on the strategic side than on the technical side, but just like this, John pointed out about the last session, there's a lot of data to cover, and so I'm going to be moving kind of fast. The slides will be available for you, and they're recording this, so you can pick it up tomorrow and watch it again if you want. Okay, so that's odd. Okay, that came up backwards. That's interesting. The first word I want to kind of focus in on is culture. Data protection in particular requires, and effective data management requires a certain culture in the company. And that culture consists of three major components: awareness, suspicion, and shared responsibility. These, of course, are not the only components of your corporate culture. Obviously, they're just three that focus on this particular area, but worth talking about. And awareness, when I say awareness, I'm talking about awareness of the threat landscape. Not all users think of it that way. Users really don't think about data exploits until they hit them. And then they think a lot about them, but they don't really think about the fact that there's so many threats out there. I read a stat recently that there's a new threat introduced on the internet every 39 seconds. That's like 2,500 new ones per day. And they're constantly emerging. There's constantly new ones coming out. So it's all the running you can do to stay in the same place. They're also not necessarily totally cognizant of threats from within. The fact is that threats from within don't necessarily mean that you've got bad acting people in your company or people who are malevolent. You have people who could be making mistakes, who could be putting something in the wrong place or leaving something open, or there's a million mistakes they can make. So you've got to be as cognizant of the possibility of threats from within as from without. And in terms of threats from within, basic hygiene: don't share your password with anybody ever. Certainly don't now with MFA. Don't share your mobile phone. Suspicion: beyond awareness, you really need to be cynical today. You need to be suspicious of literally every email you receive, because ransomware is rampant. It is the most popular threat exploit that is performed every day. There's more ransomware than any of the others. And ransomware starts with a phishing email, an email that looks genuine, looks like it came from your bank or your supplier or your customer or what have you. But if you look really carefully, you'll notice that the O's have been replaced with zeros in the URL, or the L's have been replaced with ones. There's a million other things, and there are whole courses to help your users be more cognizant of what may be a fishy phishing email. You also need to be skeptical of anything that seems unusual. You'll get an email from somebody that says, congratulations, we've just fulfilled your order. Your invoice for $199 can be found at here. Click that link and the world goes into a tailspin. It's not a real invoice. You didn't order that. So you need to be suspicious of literally everything coming in, make everything prove itself. We'll talk a little bit later about the concept of zero trust. And then shared responsibility. Now, this is easy to remember. Security of your data is everybody's responsibility. There is nobody who is not responsible in some way, shape, or form for protecting your corporate data. And if a user exposes your corporate data, it could be the end of their career. If you allow your data to be corrupted, it could spell the end of your career. And you really need to think about who's responsible for that. Who's going to lose their job? It's not your cloud provider, and it's not your company. So even though they may have contracts that say, yeah, we protect your data, at the end of the day, you've got to be cynical. You've got to make everybody prove to you that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and take every possible measure to make sure that it's done correctly. It looks like all my slides are going to come up backward. That's interesting. Okay, so the second thing I want to talk about, and this really contributes to the culture, this is the way you start to build this culture, is training. Training is the only way to prepare the users. Users are not like digital devices. Digital devices, you program them and they do what you program them to do. People, you teach them and you hope that they remember how to do what you teach them to do. So training is a very important factor when it comes to data management and data protection. Comprehensive user training, oops, that should not have gone away. There we go. Comprehensive user training is important to get started, but it's also important every day. Every day, every week, every month, every quarter, there should be some training scheduled and coming up. There should be constant updates because things are constantly changing. Every 39 seconds, a new threat is introduced. So you need to keep people aware of them. You need people to be aware of what could happen and what they should be on the lookout for. And you should be reviewing your security policy with your people on a regular basis. And people will read may scan through the policies when they first get them, but it's unlikely that they'll memorize them. So it pays to spend some time on a regular basis, periodic basis, to review your security policies with everybody. This, by the way, presupposes that you have a security policy in place, which you must. Very important. So since we're talking about it, here's what goes into building security policies. And you need policies around all of this, and let's kind of sift through them. The first one is the AUP, the Acceptable Use Policy. You can't know how important this is because perhaps you've never been sued over it. There are companies that have. People use their email for things they shouldn't be using their email for. It's in the security policy. They didn't read it. Many companies forbid you to send personal emails on your corporate email address. Most people don't know that, and most people get away with it because nobody's really looking. Until somebody says something rude, crude, or inappropriate to somebody, and that person comes back to management and says, what is with you people? There's many other issues. What is considered acceptable use of the network? What are you allowed to do on the network? What are you allowed to do with corporate data? Can you share it with anybody? Unlikely. But if there are certain authorities you can share them with, you can share your data. And clearly identify who is appropriate for that. In terms of identity and access policies, it's always good to have a consistent structure for your user IDs. Partly because it's the easy way to spot when somebody's doing something they shouldn't be doing. You see a different construction for the user ID. But even more important than that is minimal password strength. Having to require a specific combination of capital letters, lowercase, special characters, and numbers. Worth doing. It makes it harder for people to remember their passwords, but they'll figure it out. What you don't want is for somebody unauthorized to figure it out. It's still estimated that 70 to 80% of people continue to use the word password as their password, or their spouse's name or their pet's name, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are not acceptable passwords. You really need to have a structure for your password that requires some thinking and some formulation and some serious concentration. And also, and I know this sounds onerous, but require password changes periodically. By not doing that, you're giving bad actors a longer opportunity to figure out somebody's password if it's standing still. Make it a moving target. Today, if you're not using multi-factor authentication, that's shocking. I remember a time when you could walk around with your little key fob and people thought you were cool. Today, you use your mobile phone. And when you try to sign in, they send you a one-time code. You enter that code and you're allowed in. This combines something you know, your password, with something you have, your smartphone. And it's a much, much more secure way to identify a person. Also recommendation that you use role-based access control. When you think about it, how many users you have, if you have to go in and make changes to their rights or changes to their authentication or what have you, the idea of sitting down and correcting thousands of those is, almost insurmountable. Instead, assign each user to a specific role and then just edit that role. When you edit that role, all the users in that role change. It makes it far easier, far faster, and far more secure to keep your network updated and keep specifically your security credentials updated. So RBAC is a good practice. You need to have credential protection policies in place, and you need to make sure everybody is aware of who to notify if their credentials are lost or if they discover that their credentials have been exploited and found and are being used by somebody else. People shouldn't have to wonder, who do I turn to fix that? They should know immediately who to reach out to get assistance and protect the data by changing the existing password and trying to do tracebacks on who's trying to access it. Okay, so that's identity and access policies. Data sensitivity, clearly within your naming management, you need to specify who has access to which data entities. You don't want everybody to have access to everything. You want to give the least access possible. People in accounting don't need marketing information. People in marketing certainly don't need accounting information. And that's everywhere. Just give each person the minimal number of assets that they are required to use, that they have to use to do their job, and no more than that. And provide ongoing governance to make sure that it stays that way, and that if there are any changes, they're made. In terms of risk mitigation, this is a much bigger issue than the words suggest. In terms of, you need to assess every risk. You need to identify every risk, assess each risk, analyze each risk, and figure out what your mitigation strategy is for each risk. And once that's done, maybe you'll be able to sleep at night. But take risk very seriously, because there is somebody out there right now thinking, wouldn't it be fun to get at those data assets? And that's sometimes the only driver. For those of you who are watching carefully will notice that I skipped data backup and retention policy. I apologize for that. But it's worth pointing out that especially if you're subject to federal rules for common procedure, you have to establish how long you're going to keep each data entity, how long you're going to maintain them in storage before you delete them, destroy them. If you don't delete them, you can be in violation of compliance issues. If you delete them too early, same thing. So establish what your retention policy is, establish what your data backup schedule is, and make sure that somebody is fulfilling that policy. In terms of incident response, you're going to be setting thresholds for everything. If those thresholds are exceeded, there are going to be alerts. You have to have a plan in place so that those alerts have somewhere to go and someone who will do something about them. You may be chuckling about that, but you wouldn't believe how often that step is left out and the alerts just kind of go off into the ozone. Again, very easy thing to mess up. And you're reporting in some cases to your company, to law enforcement, to government agencies for regulatory acts and other government agencies like maybe the FBI. It depends on who you are, where you need to report. Disaster recovery and business continuity is a subject unto itself. We could do 2 hours on that alone. We could do 8 hours on that alone. Suffice it to say for these purposes that you need to have a plan in place to secure every data asset, if possible, in the event of a disaster. Know where the redundant copies of everything are that are distant from you, so that when you do get reestablished, you can fail over to those, access those, and get back to work. That's not the be-all, end-all of a disaster recovery policy. You also need a policy for what everybody is going to do and where everybody is going to go in the event of a disaster. It needs to be comprehensive. Who's in charge in each department? Who's going to make sure that everybody gets out safe? It's a much bigger plan than just your digital devices. And I think that's worth remembering as you build a disaster recovery program. Now, next up is compliance, another issue of many cultures, not all. The first thing I want to point out about compliance is that it's not security. Compliance and security are not the same thing. You can be completely secure, but still not be compliant with certain regulatory acts. On the same token, you can be completely compliant with those acts, but not be anywhere near secure. So you need to look at them separately, look at them differently. And you may even want to have different teams manage them because they do require different skill sets. In terms of those skill sets, you're going to have people complying with company rules. That's still compliance. So you put out policies, you put out procedures, people have to comply with them. And so you need a method for assuring that, for enforcing that. Vendor licensing. Beyond your company, you have a responsibility to the vendors you've purchased software licenses from, so that you don't have more users than you have licenses for. That's called software piracy. And some software companies suddenly get much more serious about it every now and then. And it can be very expensive. So stay within compliance of that, stay within compliance of their use policies, what the software is meant to be used for, and everything will go swimmingly. Then there's government regulatory acts. And this, of course, has got tons and tons of points, but let's kind of try to net it out. The first thing I want to emphasize is that you cannot buy compliance. If you buy a firewall, that doesn't make you compliant with anything. If that firewall is certified, then it can contribute to compliance. But in and of itself, no product is compliant. You need to be compliant. meaning that all the products you use have to be certified to achieve compliance. All of the things you do and your people do have to be correct and appropriate according to the Regulatory Act. Not only that, not enough to just do it. You have to document it. You have to document that you're doing it, and you also have to document the effectiveness. You have to test and prove that the steps you've put in place are having the intended effect to remain compliant with the Regulatory Act. Any business associates you use, cloud providers are a perfect example, should be in and of themselves compliant entities unto themselves. That doesn't make you compliant, but it contributes to your being compliant. Your best bet, your best strategy, is to always be in a mode where you're preparing for the next audit. It instills a discipline so that everybody knows, oh gosh, the pressure's on. We have to make sure everything's right, and that's a good thing. The requirements change sometimes, so you need to be reviewing them regularly, make sure you're fully up to date on them. There are great products out there that can not only examine your digital world, but also survey your users so that they can confirm that they're doing specific things or answer specific questions that you need answered. And you can gather that all up in one place by using automated software products that do that for you, and they're worth taking a look at. The bottom line is that it can be a very expensive proposition to be out of compliance. The fines continue getting steeper and steeper and steeper. A little over anxious on the trigger finger there. You don't want to confront compliance fines. Some of them are obscenely high. And so all of this contributes to protecting yourself from that. The other issue, separate from compliance, is privacy. And privacy in today's world, with social media, with eyes everywhere, with the world living on Zoom, privacy has become more and more of an issue. Not just your privacy, but your customers' privacy. That's what drove GDPR and also CCPA in California. GDPR basically says that if you're doing business with a customer in Europe, you're beholden to do specific things upon request. And one of those is that they have the right to be forgotten. If they tell you, get me off your database, you have to get them off your database, which is a good right for them to have. You should have the right to say, I don't want to be on your database, and get yourself removed. And if you are here in the United States, by the way, and you are doing business with customers in Europe, you must be GDPR compliant to continue doing business with customers in Europe. As I mentioned earlier, data sovereignty, your data has to be in a specific country in some cases. It depends on the country. They all have different rules and regulations about where your data must reside. Make yourself familiar with those and make sure that you comply with that. This one worked correctly. Now we're at the cloud data management, and the elements are right here. Let me point out one thing. You'll notice that item 4 there is data backup and restore, and we're going to get into detail on it. But what I wanted to point out is that the phrase data management is now being applied across the board to all data. There's not a separate science for data backup. Data backup is moving data from place to place, so it's managing that data. The best providers look at data as something to be managed, and they provide a platform to manage data throughout its life cycle. That kind of unified approach prevents a lot of disconnections and makes it easier for you to guarantee resilience in your data management strategy. Data management strategy starts with cloud provider selection. Which cloud are you going to use? Cloud should make management easier. If you find that you're using a cloud that makes management more difficult and more time-consuming, run cloud. And that's dependent upon your applications, and so forth. Your cloud provider should be providing automatic updates on a regular basis. It should be that that's transparent to you. You're not managing the servers anymore. So you shouldn't have to be patching them or applying updates on a regular basis. That's something they should be doing. They should provide simplified pricing. And let me tell you, none of them do. On Tuesday, I'm doing a presentation here about the different cloud providers and how to select them. And pricing is a moving target. So I don't know that you find simplified. However, you will always find consumption-based pricing. And it's something you need to be careful of, because it's very easy for a user to suddenly start overusing or leaving data resources open, or setting on processes that just consume tons and tons of storage. And you may end up receiving a bad surprise in the form of an invoice, potentially for hundreds of thousands of dollars in overages. And that can be a career-altering event. You don't want that to happen. So you need to practice a lot of vigilance over consumption when you're using consumption-based pricing. It's a good thing. You're only paying for what you use, but make sure that what you use is what you really intend to use. In terms of data management, it should be easy to manage data in a cloud environment. Not just managing the cloud, but managing the data itself, managing the movement of data, the storage of data, the protection of data. That should be very clear and very easy to do in a good cloud platform. Obviously, you turn to cloud for infinite scaling. As your company grows, you want your data capacity to grow with it. That should be easy. That should be no harder than a request on a console, self-service. I need 3 more terabytes. Boom, you got them. Your cloud provider should possess all the necessary security and regulatory certifications. Depends on what kind of company you are, what you're subject to. But it's pretty easy to get that information, just ask. And also, and this is something people sometimes don't look for, a good cloud provider will provide tons of great APIs. We are living in the age of interoperability. It's all about interoperability. In an Internet of Things, where there are billions and billions of things connected to the Internet all over the planet, they all have to work together. And so when they don't, suddenly you're in kludge land, and you have to figure out a workaround, and that's not fun. So if there are APIs in place to make it easy for you to connect the applications you are running in the cloud, and then connect them with other applications outside your cloud, that's a better world. So, stay focused on having a cloud provider who offers you tons of APIs. Okay, visibility and control. These are 2 out of the 3 things you desperately need to have when managing a cloud environment. The first is visibility. You've got to be able to see everything. What applications are running? Where are they running? Who's using them? How's the network doing? Is the network healthy? What systems are running? What systems have been taken down? Not for nothing, but most systems management will power down servers that don't have any virtual machines on them. That's great. You need to know that, though. And what's the condition of all your data assets? Once you have visibility of them, you should have visibility of anomalies happening with them. And when you can notice those quickly and you have full control of them, then you get to that third step, which is responsiveness. You can very quickly react, very quickly respond to an anomaly, a problem, an outage, a potential attack. The faster you can respond, the faster you can resolve it. And speed is of the essence. But to be able to fix it, you need to have control over it. So visibility and control are both very important, as is monitoring for all the threats that are out there. There are tons of them. You should be able to go proactive and be threat hunting rather than just sitting there and kind of watching for something to show up. Protect everything is probably something I shouldn't have to say, but it's worth saying anyway. You know, security is a chain, and it's only as good as the weakest link in that chain. The chain, of course, starts with the user. Does the user understand what they need to be doing to participate in effective security? Then there are the endpoints that the users are using. Are they secure? Are they properly configured? Then we get to the network, and there's a million things that go wrong on the network. Are we enjoying a flow of properly formed packets? Is there anything out there that looks like potentially an attack? Can we spot that before it gets to us? And once we get past the firewall, we're concerned about servers in the cloud, virtual servers, or on-prem servers, any server. We're concerned, is anybody trying to attack that? Is it protected properly? Do we have a firewall in place? Do we have intrusion prevention? Same with storage. Are we protecting our storage devices? And is all the data encrypted? I mentioned desktops separately, even though they are end-user endpoints, but because they need the same attention as all other endpoints. And just because they're sitting in a desk connected by hard wire doesn't mean they're any more secure than anything else. So you need to be protecting your desktops. You need to be protecting your data. I mean, that's really what it's all about at the end of the day. All of the other things contribute to protecting the data. And there it's just the discipline of always maintaining encryption, whether at rest or in motion. Your applications need to be protected. Some applications are very, very vulnerable to attack. You need to harden those, or you need to select those that are hardened. And I would be remiss if I did not focus in on ransomware. With ransomware, you're trying to make sure that the person does the right thing and doesn't miss that a phishing email is phishing. The problem is that's prevention, and it's not all that effective. It's not all that efficient. So you need to have some kind of a hedge against that, and that hedge is data backup. Your most recent data backup is your best protection against ransomware. If somebody steals or corrupts your data and you have a very recent backup, you have very little loss. You don't have to pay that ransom. However, these thieves are getting more sophisticated. Now, they're not only corrupting your live data, they're traveling through and corrupting your backup data. And so at least one copy of your data has to be on a server that's not connected to the network. There's an air gap between the network and that copy of the data. Viable, possible, doable, practical, but not so much so that we can cover it in depth here. Again, I want to point out again that you own ultimate responsibility for your data. It's your career that's threatened if anything goes wrong. Just keep thinking of it that way and you won't get confused. Yes, every cloud provider has some form of backup service capability. They have redundant data centers. All of that is terrific. But you may be the kind of person, like me, who likes to wear a belt and suspenders. So if one fails, the other succeeds. That may take the shape of putting a BDR device in your own premises and having your own copy locally. No reason not to do it. We talk about having central oversight but local protection. So if you have a whole bunch of remote offices and branch offices, each one has its own firewall, its own IPS, its own suite of data protection equipment, but you centrally can see all of them and manage all of them and respond quickly when something goes wrong with any of them. So you need visibility of all of them in one place. You need reporting on them so that you know that they're consistently performing well. Now it expands beyond the remote offices and the branch offices, and it continues out to the Internet of Things. There are billions and billions, as Carl Sagan would say, there are billions of devices out there that you're responsible for. Some of them. There are switches, there are sensors. Now there are concentrator devices so that all those switches and sensors have something to connect to locally for the backhaul back to the main network and back into the cloud. You're responsible for managing all those endpoints. They're all endpoints. It's a heck of a responsibility. It requires study, it requires development, and it requires work. So the edge is going to become a preoccupation for you the further and further we go into the Internet of Things. So start looking at your edge devices. Most of them are fairly low-quality devices. They're small, they're low-powered, they're very low-resourced. The networks that they're on are lossy. You need to compensate for all of that in the way that you protect them. And that takes a lot of development and a lot of doing. Again, just another mention of data sovereignty. Make sure that you're not violating anybody's sovereign right to keep their data in their own country. And then there's Secure Access Service Edge, which has the promise of making a lot of what I just said obsolete. SASE is new. It was defined by Gartner. But it is pretty exciting as a prospect. Let me bring up the ideas behind it. SASE starts off by taking advantage of the fast transport of SD-WAN. You're using multiple different kinds of communication circuits bonded together. And so you ostensibly can save on WAN costs, which is a big cost these days. This will also, be, by nature of it, help you secure those IoT devices that are sitting out there at the edge. It provides the clear visibility you need of all the data flows across all the internet circuits you're using in your enterprise. And it provides the ability to choose which business-critical applications get priority. You can actually manage that from SASE. It provides you with firewall as a service, which holds the promise of meaning that you don't have to put a firewall device at every location. That will be provided as a service from SASE centrally. These next-generation firewalls protect against a world full of threats, probably the ones you're most worried about. If your servers are hosted in data centers or if your users are at home working across a VPN, SASE can protect them. It also provides secure web gateways that do traffic inspection, which protects users from sites that they shouldn't ought to be using. And it helps you enforce your access policies by giving you more management capability over them. It allows you to use cloud access security brokers, intermediaries who are out there on the web that you can use to help you protect your various endpoints. It's an additional support layer, and it ensures that network traffic is properly connected and complies with your security policies. And then we get to zero trust, and I don't have enough time to really go deep into this, but I do want to point out that the core philosophy behind zero trust is you never trust anything. You always verify everything. You assume that you're always in a breach. It's kind of like the Hulk in one of the Avengers movies, revealing that the way that he keeps from getting angry is by being angry all the time. And that's how he controls it. Well, it's the same thing here. You're assuming that you're always in the midst of a breach, and you're acting as if you're always in a breach. When you verify, you're not just taking somebody's word for it. You're making sure. You're explicitly verifying everything aggressively. So you have to have aggressive system monitoring management. You have all of your defenses in place and operating. You have to be checking those on a regular basis. You make the assumption that every request for anything is malicious. Not maybe malicious. It is malicious until you prove to yourself that it's not. This sounds, pretty serious, and it is. It absolutely is. So zero trust, the devices and the software and the Services available to support Zero Trust are emerging very rapidly right now. Worth taking a look at, worth studying. I don't want to say it's not ready for prime time, but it's early. Suffice it to say, it's still early. Mentioned endpoint security earlier, worth bringing back again. Remember that your endpoints are your most vulnerable network segment. They include that PEBCAC, that person that exists between the keyboard and the chair. But they also include your devices themselves. You need to use strong identity and access management, which means that you're proving to yourself that the user and their device are eligible to connect to your network. You're probably going to use multi-factor authentication to assure the user, so the user has to combine something they have with something they know. But you're also going to use network access control to interrogate the device, make sure that it's configured properly, that it's eligible to connect to your network, it's properly secured to connect to your network. And again, my strongest recommendation that you use role-based access control to make it easier to manage all of this so that you don't slack off on it. Sorry, I didn't reveal the bullets this time. Okay. In the overall, data management is a science that starts with data leveling and categorization. Basically, that says that you have frequently used data, put it on fast, probably high-cost storage. You have data that you almost never use, put it on commodity storage, cheap storage. May not be as quick to access, but you only use it seldom. So leveling is a good step to start with. Always obey the 3-2-1 rule, meaning that you have 3 copies of each data asset on at least 2 different types of media, and one of them is not local. One of them is off-site. This may be a little out of date in the cloud era, and we'll probably have a 5-4-3 rule soon, but it's good to think of it in terms of multiple backups, one of which is air-gapped. Data duplication basically says, let's lower the cost of transporting the data. Let's lower the cost of managing and taking care of the data. The way you do that is to make sure that everything is unique, that you don't have multiple copies of the same file over and over and over again. And you know as well as I do what causes that. It's users being careful. Unfortunately, it creates disadvantage. Deduplication as a process can help restore that efficiency. The data retention policy is critical. You need to establish how long you're going to hold on to data, how you're going to delete it, when you're going to delete it, what steps need to be taken to delete it so that you don't inadvertently delete the wrong data. And again, that air gap. Take a look at air gap. Take a look at how to achieve air gap and make sure that you've got one copy that it can't go across the network to get to. Testing is another important issue. No data management strategy is complete without testing. You need to test restore. There's an old saying that says, well, the backup worked, but will it restore? And the worst time to find that out, and to answer that question, is when you need the restore and it doesn't work. Back in the days of tape backup, it happened all the time because tape degrades, and it degraded the data along with it. Today, maybe less of it, but still there's many things that can impact your backup copies. And you need to make sure they restore properly and the equipment is in place, is functioning properly. It's worth having a periodic restore testing session. Penetration testing, you may think that all your security measures are working great. Prove it. Prove it. Be skeptical. Have an ethical hacker come in and try to breach it. And if they can, you know you've got a problem that they can help you resolve. Encryption. This is why they have defensemen on soccer teams and football teams. You know, the last line of defense. If they get through everything else, we don't want them to get through that last line of defense. And so, we had a real problem there. Come on. Sorry about that. The slides didn't apparently work properly. Here we go. As I've said multiple times today, always encrypt all data in transit. Always encrypt all data at rest in storage. It must always be encrypted except when you're using it. Never share the keys with your cloud provider or anybody else for that matter, except those who are going to be accessing the data. And I apologize for misspelling subpoena. I know I'm going to hear about it from a lot of people. But you also subpoena-proof your data when you keep it encrypted and don't share the key. If you look at any cloud provider contract, you will probably find that they're telling you that if the government subpoenas your data from them, they will give it up instantly. They will not fight. They will not resist. They will not hesitate. They will give up your data immediately, and nobody's going to notify you. You will not know that the government has accessed your data. Now, if they don't have that key, that government agency has nothing. They have gibberish. And so they need to approach you and subpoena you for the key. Now, when you get that subpoena, you do have to comply. But at least now you know. And now you can engage legal counsel if you need to, or some other kind of protection. The worst thing in the world is to not know. And so encryption protects you from everything in so many ways. And whatever the investment is, it's worth that investment. Which brings us to the takeaways for this session. The things I'd like you to come away remembering. Number one, and I've always said this, it's all about the data. Data, and the applications that use that data. We have to protect it no matter where it is, no matter what it's doing. Data protection is everybody's responsibility, your cloud provider, your company, you, your users. Everybody has a job to do when it comes to security, and everybody needs to take that job very seriously. Your vigilance must be constant. There is no moment at which you can let down that vigilance because there's always somebody trying to compromise your network, always, all the time, which means the training has to be constant so everybody knows how to protect against those people who are always trying to compromise you. And then finally, security exists at every level of networking. And this is important to remember. I said in the beginning that security is a chain, and that chain is only as good as its weakest link. You have to put the same level of effort into every level of security. Many of you are probably familiar with the 7-layer model of networking, the open systems interconnect model, if you will. And basically, you've got the data link, the actual cable in the wall, you've got the data link to the network, you've got the network itself, transport protocols on the network, session protocols to establish user sessions, presentation layer to make it possible for the user to interact, and then the applications themselves, 7 layers. People ask me all the time, where's the security layer? And the answer is yes. Security exists at every layer. Every layer has a huge security component, and you need to focus on security at every level, which is why security is not trivial. It's something that really takes a lot of attention, a lot of work, and a lot of concern. With that, I have hit 10 minutes to the hour. We still have a little bit of time. So, David, do we have any questions?
We certainly do, Howard. Let's get right to them. First one, you said your cloud provider isn't responsible for your data. Is that true? Can't you sue them for data loss?
I'm going to temper my answer to that by saying that that each cloud provider is different. They each have different provisions in their contracts. And it's very possible that some of them aren't all that good at creating those contracts, at least with the smaller cloud providers. But at the end of the day, the big cloud providers will tell you that they are responsible for the proper operation of the facilities they've put in place to protect your data, but they are not responsible for the data itself. And so more often than not, you can't sue them. My recommendation, since I'm not an attorney, is to consult your contract that you have with your cloud provider. And if you're not certain, consult with your attorney and let them take a look at that contract.
Okay, great. If you can find the right lawyer, you can sue anybody. There's another question following up on those big cloud providers. Don't all the big cloud providers have data backup built in?
Yes, they definitely do. Do you trust it? I'm sorry. Yes, there's certainly, there are data backup services available for you to subscribe to that will provide additional backup of your data. By nature, the large cloud providers have hundreds of data centers. They replicate your data to at least a few of them. The number depends upon which cloud provider. And yeah, so there is a lot of security in that. And I'm not saying that it's conceivable that all of their data centers could go out at once. For that to happen, you've probably got bigger problems in your data. And so I wouldn't be terribly worried about it. However, again, who loses their job? If the data is compromised in any way, shape, or form, if anything is lost, I'm a belt and suspenders guy. I would rather wear a belt and suspenders to make sure my pants stay up. Same thing applies to cloud data. I'm great with the cloud data services. There are second cloud services that you can engage that do a phenomenal job of providing security. A secure backup, a solid backup, a reliable backup. And certainly you should be looking at those. But at the same time, you may just want to have some kind of VDR on your own premises to make an additional backup. Nobody says that 3, 2, 1 is as far as you've got to go. You could have 5, 6, 7 different copies. It's really up to you individually. Personally, although I have all the confidence in the world, especially in the hyperscalers, I still want to have my own backup just in case. The day may come when that changes.
Okay, great. Here's a question that kind of relates to the bring your own device phenomenon. The question reads, we are trying to do everything on smartphones. What would you say is the best way to protect data on those?
Okay, there are really two methods that have been pretty much popular. One is storage segmentation. You create 2 separate containers, if you will, on your mobile device. One only contains your personal data. The other only contains corporate data, and the 2 cannot cross each other. So that you can't take corporate data and send it to your friend using Facebook Messenger. Ostensibly, that's a good strategy. If it's working properly, it's great. It also makes provision so that if they have to brick your mobile device, they don't brick your personal data. That's a very nice thing. But there's a challenge, whenever you're segmenting something like that, partitioning something like that, there's always the concern that it's going to be surmountable. Somebody's going to be able to figure out how to beat it. What I have found to be the only way to protect the data on a mobile device, the only way that I find acceptable, is to never have the data reach the mobile device. What I'm talking about, of course, is the virtual device interface, VDI. Started with computers, but they're using it all over the place on mobile devices now. Basically, the actual application runs in the cloud, at the data center in the cloud, the desktop as a service provider. The data never leaves the data center. It stays there and gets processed in the cloud. The only thing that comes out to your mobile device are the screen changes, the pixels that have to change on the screen, and the sound. You get the results of the application, but the application isn't running on your local device, and the data is not ever getting to your local device. VDI, to me, is the best strategy for mobile device computing. And I suspect you're going to see it getting faster and faster and becoming the way that you level the playing field between all users, whether they're in-house or out. But that to me is the only way that I feel comfortable personally protecting mobile devices.
Okay. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have time for. Thanks again, Howard, for a great presentation and answering those questions.
My pleasure.
Okay, everyone else, stay tuned. We're going to take a short break and be back at the top of the hour for our third session, hottest third-party products and the giveaway of that Surface Pro 7. We'll be right back.
everyone. The event is now live. Becky, please take it away.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our third and final session of the day, Hottest Third-Party Products. I'm so happy to have you guys with us. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope you've enjoyed it so far, and we have a great third session for you. Some quick notes before we start very quickly. We want to, again, thank you for attending. Please be sure to stick around for the end, not only because you're going to be eligible to win that Surface Pro 7. All you have to do, by the way, you don't have to do anything special. Just by being on when we do the drawing at the end, you'll be eligible to win, because we just know because you're on, you're there. That's how we do the drawing. It's a random drawing of everyone who's attending. So that's all you have to do, just be there. You'll be eligible. But also because we do a survey at the end. Our editors work really hard to do these presentations, and we want to know what you think. So please stay on to the end. Take that survey that pops up at the end. Let us know your honest opinions, and that's going to help us, do more of these summits and more of these summits for you going forward. So thank you so much. Stick around. Let us know. Also, speaking of future events, we really, really want to thank our sponsors, Druva, Metallic, Cluneo, and AvePoint. And not only are we just thrilled to be associated with these companies, but, what they're doing right now is they're underwriting this content. They allow us to bring you these summits for free. And it's thrilling for us because we're able to bring all this content to you because of these companies. They're out there. They're supporting the community by doing this. So please show your thanks. Go ahead, download those resources, go to their sites, get a demo. Please show your thanks to these companies because they allow us to do this and our editors to do this, and we really, really appreciate them. So thank you so much. So with that, I want to turn it on to our first speaker of today. We're so thrilled to have with us W. Curtis Preston. He's the Chief Technical Evangelist at Druva. And Curtis, you can go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Becky. So good morning, afternoon, evening, or wherever you happen to be in the world. I am W. Curtis Preston, and I work for Druva. So for those of you unfamiliar with me, I've been in the backup industry for coming up on 30 years. I've written all of O'Reilly's books on backups, including the most recent one, Modern Data Protection, which was released in May. Feel free to check that out. So having been in the data protection industry for, like I said, almost 30 years, I've seen an incredible number of changes in this industry. When I started, we were backing up to individual tape drives in servers. They were DAT drives, for those of you that remember the DDS drives back in the day, and I even backed up to 9-track, if you can imagine that. That was the way things were when I started. In our entire data center for a $35 billion company, if you can imagine this, was only 300 gigabytes. Try to, I have that in my hand now. Since then we've added, obviously, tape automation. Tape automation solved a lot of problems, but then they created other problems. As tape drives got faster and faster, what happened was we created this speed mismatch between disk and tape. A lot of people think that the problem with tape was that it's too slow, or it was unreliable. It's actually, for the most part, it was reliable, but the problem was actually that it was too fast. And so the way we solved the speed problems, we brought disk into the picture. And then because disk was too expensive, we brought deduplication into the picture. So then suddenly we had tape, and we had disk, and we had dedupe. And each one of these was a disk or a different vendor, right? And then another vendor would be the backup software vendor. And, and then, of course, if you were using tape for offsite, which most people still were, you then had the offsite vaulting vendor. And then some environments started using deduplication. And then one nice thing about deduplication is you could replicate that deduplication, and you could replicate it to another data center or perhaps to the cloud. And then the cloud got very, very popular, and suddenly we were sending some backups to the cloud. And that's how we created this drawing that you look at. It's incredibly complicated. And by the time, and then there was also virtualization came onto the scene, and that complicated things again. And so suddenly it became very common for people to have one backup software for their sort of regular legacy systems, and then another backup software for their virtualization systems. And now we have cloud vendors, and they have other backup software products for those. And so it is incredibly common for companies to have many products. So, and the other thing is, as I mentioned, we have, I forgot to mention mobile devices, right? There's also mobile devices. So we've got data in mobile devices, which would include laptops and mobile, cell phones, and data in the cloud, which would include things like AWS, as well as things like Microsoft 365 or G Suite. And then also we still have hybrid workloads. So there's people running data in the data center. So we think all of that data should be protected, right? But in order to do that, you need an on-demand system, right? You need the ability to scale up and to scale down. But that last part I think is really important because it speaks to cost. If you're able to scale down, you're able to save cost. If your infrastructure cost goes down, your backup cost goes down. You also, you want a consumption model. You want this beautiful thing of, we have, the whole world has gone to this idea of SaaS. Like, so many people have gone from Exchange to Microsoft 365, for example, because they can pay for it as they consume it. As they have more employees, they have more licenses with 365. As they have fewer employees, they can scale that back. And the same thing happens with the back end. The other thing is you want to make sure, I completely agree with the previous presenter where he talked about, making sure that data is encrypted in transit as well as encrypted at rest. And I really agree with that part about making sure that your cloud vendor, especially if it's a data protection vendor, doesn't ever, and I emphasize ever, have the ability to access your data. So one really important question to ask any vendor like that is to ask them whether or not anyone at their company is able to access the unprotected copies of your data. Because if the answer to that is yes, then all of the things that he was worried about happen. So the Druva Cloud Platform does all of those things I was just talking about, right? We protect the hybrid workloads, both on-prem as well as in the cloud. We also protect cloud workloads such as 365 or G Suite, and also anything running in AWS. And then also protecting endpoints, which includes both Windows and Mac laptops, as well as iOS and Android devices. So everything always starts with backup. They call me Mr. Backup, and that's where it starts, right? But on top of that, you can then add other services. So, and by the way, we are a fully a cloud-native SaaS provider, which means that you don't install any infrastructure in order to access the services, right? You just all of the back-end infrastructure that's necessary to run it is our problem. It runs in our cloud account in AWS, which means you do not need an AWS to use the basic services that we offer. If you do want to have disaster recovery, which is the next thing that we have there, we do need a place to recover to, and we use AWS. So you would need, if you want to use that service, you need an Amazon VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. But other than that, you don't need an AWS account to use our services. The eDiscovery, this is another really important thing. Because we have all of your data in one place, you can do things like federated search across multiple things, like across both a user's laptop as well as anything that they've sent or received in 365. This helps you comply with a number of regulations, including all sorts of things like GDPR, HIPAA, and CCPA here at I happen to live in California. And then the all-important ransomware recovery. If you haven't been looking at the news, if you're not concerned about ransomware, then I don't know what to tell you. It's the number one problem, I think, from a data protection standpoint at this point. And this is why it's really important. Again, I agree with Howard where he talked about having a copy air gapped, right? And that air gap traditionally was provided by handing a tape to a man in a van. Since that's not possible in most people's environments because they're using things like cloud, Iron Mountain doesn't pick up at AWS, right? So how do you do that? Well, you need to make sure that the copy of data is as electronically removed from your environment as possible. And that means, things like changing the operating system, not storing your backups, in a Windows server, right? Storing them in a different kind of server, storing them in object storage instead of in file storage where a lot of backups are stored. And in our case, where your backups are stored are in S3 behind our Amazon accounts, configured in such a way that there is no way to read or write from that S3 object except through our application. And because this is one of the challenges that people do have with using the cloud for backup, is they, unfortunately, if they're configuring it themselves, so like if they purchase some software from a backup software vendor, and then they configure the cloud themselves and run that other backup software in the cloud, they could incorrectly configure from a security perspective. They could incorrectly configure that cloud and unfortunately open their backups up to attack both from ransomware as well as other things. In our case, this is all we do, so we make sure that stuff is already automatically configured in the most secure way possible using AWS's trusted infrastructure design principles. And then also, which means that there is no way for a ransomware attack that attacks any of your data center, your cloud resources, your mobile devices. There's no way for that ransomware to reach up and ever attack your backups. And then also, we offer long-term data retention, all built into the system, automatically scale it out as necessary. One UI, it's again, just if you're not familiar with SaaS-based data protection, just think about 365 or Salesforce. You just go to a web page. All of the backend infrastructure just magically happens. You simply go to a web page and you simply just have to tell the system what to do. You don't ever have to worry about the backend infrastructure. The features that I talked about, the things we add on top of backup, things like automated ransomware recovery compliance. There's also storage insights. So, for example, we can help you notice, hey, this server's getting a lot bigger than it used to be, or there's a whole bunch of MP3 files. Did you know that you're backing up MP3 files? And since we charge by the gigabyte, you're paying this much money per month to back up MP3 files. Did you know that? You say, no. Let me stop that. You push one button, and now all MP3 files, or however you configure it, or whatever file we're talking about, are then excluded from backup and then deleted from current backups, thus saving you money in the future. And then there is this one-click advanced disaster recovery, completely automated, recovering your entire infrastructure into the cloud, either from on-prem infrastructure or cloud infrastructure. So if you're not familiar with Druva, as I mentioned, we are leading data protection provider, over 2 billion backups a year, about 50% year-over-year growth, growing very quickly. We had recently, actually, this 88 certified Net Promoter Score is actually now 89, which is a great Net Promoter Score, especially when you look at SaaS apps, which are actually typically very low. More than 50 Fortune 500 customers and over 200 petabytes of data under management. We get great ratings from our customers and also from the industry, listed as a strong performer by Forrester, and also as a visionary by Gartner in the most recent Enterprise Backup and Recovery Software Solutions. Don't have time to cover all of these things, but the Gartner Peer Insights, and the Trust Radius, all of these folks, we get great ratings from our customers. Real quick, the benefits of the cloud-based DR. You don't need to run a data center to do DR, right? It's very secure. Everything is isolated and immutable, stored and encrypted, and keys that you manage. Nothing that we ever have access to. You're not paying for the infrastructure until you actually need it. You design everything up front. You can test it at any time at no cost. And then when it's time to actually declare a disaster due to an actual natural disaster or a ransomware attack, it's literally pushing one button. Regeneron is a big customer of Druva's. We do quite a bit for them. They back up both AWS as well as on-prem infrastructure. And they actually happen to use an optional thing that we offer called Cloud Cache, where you can specify a system on-prem to back up your data on-prem before it's then sent up to the cloud. That's optional. We don't charge extra for that, but they happen to use that. And they now have one cloud platform for all of their data endpoints, their data center, as well as AWS. So if you're interested, the beautiful thing about Druva is that a free trial is super easy because you don't have anything to install. You simply infrastructure-wise, you need to put in an agent, or you need to put in an OVA and VMware, or authenticate us to AWS or 365. Right? You don't need to install any infrastructure to try out our product. We have a TCO calculator, and everything you can see that you can access is available at druva.com. And with that, I think I'll hand things back over to Becky for Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Curtis. It's always so great to have you with us. So thank you so much for coming back. We do have some audience questions, and we have time for a few more. So go ahead, and audience, you can put in your questions now. Any we don't have time for, we will get over to Curtis. But first, start with, let's go with this one. How do you handle backup encryption, and it says actual data, not just in transit?
Yeah, so basically, it's interesting that they say actual data. I guess they mean like encrypting the data when it's stored, because basically there's two places that you can encrypt data. You either encrypt it in transit or encrypt it, in storage. And the answer is we do both of those things, right? So we do what's called source-side deduplication, which means we decide using a global deduplication that compares all of the backups. We decide before the backup is sent, before any chunk of data is sent, we decide that that chunk is unique. It's encrypted during transit, and then when it's encrypted again on the other side, it uses a ES256. We use something called envelope encryption, which is like a key within a key within a key. Ultimately, the key that is the sort of the basic key is it's your username and password, right? It's used to unlock that first key that then basically it unlocks a series of envelopes, which eventually gets you to your data. The way it's stored, there is no way for a Druva employee to ever get to your data, which I think is really important.
Just another one. Can you back up off-site to another location or to your own data center?
So this one, I'll be blunt. If what you want to do is you want to back up, you don't want to use the cloud, we might not be the product for you, right? Because our ultimate data, repository for your data will be the cloud. But if what you're saying is you would like an additional copy on-prem, or it could technically be off-prem if it's LAN accessible, you can use the Cloud Cache offering that I talked about earlier. Again, it's a no extra charge piece of software that you can put on a system of your choice, and you can then back up the data to that. And the reason you would do that is for local high-speed recovery purposes. If you don't want to use, for example, the cloud-based DR. But if what you want is an on-prem, on-prem run and on-prem stored backup system, that's not the business that we're in.
Okay. Another question. Do I need an AWS account for DR?
So yes, that is the only thing that you need an AWS account for. So if everything else you want to back up, laptops, 365, data centers, all of those things, you don't need an AWS account because anymore. So Salesforce, for example, runs an AWS. Netflix runs an AWS. You don't need an AWS account to use Netflix, you don't need an AWS account to use us, right? But if you want to use DR, you need a place to restore, and that restore data is obviously in plain text, and so that needs to be your data center, which means you would need an AWS account for that.
Okay, we are running out of time. If anybody has any more questions, I know they can reach you directly on Twitter at WC Preston, right?
Yeah,
so
WC Preston.
That's your Twitter handle. So Mr. Backup. And then, but do you have any final parting advice? What would be your number one tip when it comes to cloud data protection?
Well, I'm going to refer back to the previous presenter. He was talking about the 3-2-1 rule. I love the 3-2-1 rule, and I don't think it's outdated. What I think it is it's just a great tool to help you decide if you need more, right? If your backup system, data protection system, doesn't at least comply with the 3-2-1 rule, then you need something else. And I specify that, for example, when you look at something like 365 or G Suite, they have some data protection features built into, and they're very nice and they're very convenient, and they're included with the product. They do not comply with the 3-2-1 rule, which is the most basic rule of data protection. And so if your backups don't comply with that, you don't really have backups. So that's what I use the 3-2-1 rule for.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Curtis. It's thrilled to have you today. We really appreciate it. And now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to our next presenter. This is another one of our favorite presenters. It's David Ngo. He is the CTO of Metallic, a Commvault venture. And David, you can take it away.
So thanks, everyone. My name is David Ngo, as David just mentioned here. I'm the CTO at Metallic at Commvault. I've been with Commvault for 23 years now. Appreciate you attending the webinar today. We're going to be talking about how you can simplify data protection across your Microsoft-centric environments, not just in the cloud, which is what a lot of SaaS-based data protection talks about, but also on premises across your heterogeneous environment. So I think it's obvious now that everyone's gone through a very rapid digital transformation. And not only have we all undergone this rapid digital transformation, but we've also accelerated our plans. So in general, everyone I speak to has moved their cloud plans forward from maybe 2 to 3 years out to 6 to 12 months out. It's a time of opportunity actually now that we've reacted to the events of the past 18 months. There's an opportunity now. There's an appetite for this transformation. I think the benefits of the speed of transformation have been realized, and so companies are looking at how they enhance remote worker productivity, how they adapt cloud more into their day-to-day operations, and how they can leverage that power. Right? How can they take advantage of new SaaS services and gain all the benefits from leveraging those? And then, of course, they still have, the responsibility and requirement of maintaining on-premises business continuity. I think most companies are not going to be moving to a complete cloud environment, perhaps ever. There's always going to be, or for some time, going to be some on-premises component workloads. You just can't move workloads that are running on, Windows 2003 and 2008, older versions of Unix and Linux. But one thing that companies have really been leveraging are the Microsoft technologies and capabilities in order to accelerate this transformation. And again, not just in the cloud, but also on premises. And I think Microsoft has been quite clear in talking about how hybrid environments really are strategic to them and a focus for their business moving forward. So it's something that is only gaining speed and steam among all of the companies that I talk to in general. But with this transformation comes a new set of risks and concerns to mitigate, right? And it's not just kind of the normal things like data loss and hardware failure and natural disaster. Those are all generally taken care of for the most part by cloud and SaaS providers. But really, it's new challenges that come with adopting new services and new features, right? Things like managing data sprawl. Every time you take advantage of a new service, a new SaaS service, you have your data in a new place. No longer do you have everything in your data center where you can manage it. Now you have to understand that your data is spread out, possibly around the world, right? Multiple clouds, multiple services. With this distribution of data comes a greatly increased surface area for attack from ransomware and malware, and even malicious insiders are becoming more and more prominent, right, in combination with these external attacks. And that's top of mind for everyone. With these concerns are obviously all the responsibilities that you have in a shared responsibility model, whether you take advantage of a cloud service or deploy software or services on your own. Things like cost control and making sure you're compliant with all industry regulations. And then above all else, of course, is privacy and data security and making sure that you still have control of your data because it is still your responsibility no matter what service you take advantage of, whether you deploy on-prem, in the cloud, or in a SaaS service. And with the adoption of new services, comes the need for data mobility and adaptability. I think flexibility in deployment and speed of adoption is become more critical than ever for companies looking to transform their businesses and take advantage of these new technologies. As workloads become portable and interesting to move to cloud or SaaS services, there is a transition period. And how do companies make sure that they're compliant and safe from all of these new risks while in this transition mode, right? While adopting new technologies. And that's not something that's going to stop. It's not like you're going to hit steady state necessarily anytime soon. Looking at these new technologies requires that you have a comprehensive plan in place for data protection, which should be considered as part of your security posture, right? So support for things, on premises like, Hyper-V and VMware, as well as, technologies in the cloud that you use from Microsoft. I think everyone pretty much has adopted Office 365, Dynamics 365, Active Directory on premises and in the cloud, SAP HANA, like not just Microsoft environments, but Microsoft enables all of these different technologies on-prem and in the cloud as well, particularly for things like SAP HANA and Kubernetes. So making sure that you can control and manage this data wherever it is from a single pane of glass is quite important. And so a SaaS data protection solution is really a great option for providing this kind of flexibility and adaptability and scale, right? And we're not just talking about scale in terms of, can we as the provider handle, thousands of customers? Yes, of course we can. That's one of the advantages of building in the cloud. But how do we provide scale and performance for you on an individual basis? You really don't care what we do for everyone else. How can we provide you with that peace of mind and performance that you need? And that's what we're really focused on, right? And SaaS gives you that, plus all of the benefits of flexibility of deployment, speed of implementation, simplicity for usability, right? Being able to handle hybrid environments. Those are all critical things, and being able to trust that technology for data protection, that's what it all comes down to. Because at the end of the day, if you can't recover your data, then data protection doesn't mean a whole lot, right? So with all of those factors in mind, we've taken the technology of Commvault, which we've built over the past 20 plus years, 25 years. We have a strong product and IP portfolio, and we've combined that with the best of SaaS, all those characteristics I just talked about: flexibility, scalability, security, performance, and we have brought out Metallic. Metallic is Commvault's portfolio of SaaS-delivered data protection services. They span those services span everything from data at the edge with laptops and desktops for remote workers, as well as SaaS applications like Dynamics 365 and Office 365, as well as hybrid environments on premises and in the cloud. So for Microsoft, wherever your data is, right, we can reach it and manage it and protect it. security, as I mentioned before, is top of mind. And with that, we've built our service on a multi-layered security approach based on a zero trust model. And so we can ensure that your data is secure. We have certifications with our SOC 2 Type 2 certification, as well as our ISO 27001 cert. We have GDPR compliance to ensure that your data is safe and you can meet these privacy regulations in Europe and around the world with our global service. And we recently achieved FedRAMP High Ready status. This is the highest standard of FedRAMP available, and I think it's a great validation of the security models that we have today. And so we can support things like Office 365 and GCC high environments. Right. This is a reflection of our security model and how we approach building a secure service and handling customer data. So let's take a quick look at the product. Let's see here. So this is the hub. It is the central UI for how you interact with Metallic. It's made to be simple and straightforward and clean and give you access to what you need when you need it. All of our services are here, and you can bring up any of these tabs that you want. You don't have to have the tabs that you don't want, and so it's customizable for you, right? The most common operations per service are here. You see all of the data that you want per service. At the bottom, you have the most common operations like user management and how to get documentation and how to get support. And if you want, you can even go ahead and chat with our support team. So it's very straightforward in terms of how you can access all of the functions you need on a day-to-day basis. If you look at something like Dynamics 365, actually all of the services, the configuration and general operation of the service are guided. So we've taken that experience and we've taken the technology that we've built and we've provided the best practices for you in an easy to understand way with smart defaults. So you can do things like configure backup of an on-premises VMware environment with a local backup copy, and make it extremely straightforward to have that, plus a cloud copy for longer-term retention. And normally, flexibility kind of begets complexity, but in this case, that magic combination is what we know and have heard from our customers is the desired one, and so we make it extremely easy. Obviously, these are all just defaults. You can do whatever you'd like, but we provide that guidance right in the product. Configuration of something like Dynamics or Office 365 is very simple. You configure an app, an Azure app for secure access to your environments, and we can take just some credentials and get that access up and running extremely easily. We protect all your data by default, so we can automatically discover new Dynamics 365 environments and Office 365 users. And so you can be assured and rest easy knowing that your data is protected, that you don't have to keep after it all the time. Of course, restore is critical, right? Being able to get to the data you want quickly is extremely important because, backups kind of happen by themselves, but when you need to do a restore is when the pressure's on. So here you can see we have very granular restore capabilities, and this is true across the product. You can restore a single file back to a VM without having to restore the entire VM or install any additional software on the VM. Here you can see we can do table level or row level restores of Dynamics 365 data. You can search here. You can look at the different recovery points that we have, and you can search for the exact data that you want. So you don't have to go and scroll and take a lot of time in order to get to exactly the important data that you need in order to bring your business back online. Okay? So one great thing that we're really proud of is that in the 10 years that Gartner has published a Magic Quadrant for enterprise backup and recovery software solutions, we have been a leader all 10 of those years. So we're 10 for 10. We're very proud of that. We've also been listed as the highest as the leader and have the highest scores across all use cases in the critical capabilities for enterprise backup and recovery software solutions. And the innovations we have in cloud-native data protection and data protection as a service really help define that continued leadership and show our vision for the future. We've been able to, and fortunate enough to have won a number of accolades from the industry, including a Gold Stevie. We were named a best product for the IT World Awards, which is fantastic, and we've been called cloud-based backup done right for a change. And while these are all nice, what I really focus on is what we hear and see from our customers. And the value we can bring to them and the peace of mind we bring to them on a day-to-day basis as well. Customers across all industries and all geographies around the world have really been able to benefit from our services, and that's really why we come to work every day. And a great thing to take advantage of is and get additional value from is our current limited time offer, where you can buy 3 users and get 1 for free for Metallic for Office 365, Dynamics 365, and Endpoint. This is on top of some of the other great things we give away for free, like our granular Active Directory support. If you get any Metallic service, you can get Active Directory and Azure Active Directory backup and restore for free as well. So you can take advantage of this offer from any of the partners we have here, or any other Metallic partner, really. And to get a complete list, you can email partners@metallic.io. Thanks very much. Really appreciate, you attending today. Go to our website at metallic.io, sign up for a free demo, get a look at the product, and take it for a spin yourself. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, David. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions today, but if you put them in the system, we will get them to David. So put those questions in. We'll get them over to David. We just don't have time for questions with David today. So we're going to go ahead now and move on to our next presentation. And I'm just absolutely thrilled to have with us our next speaker. He's Joe Ferguson, Cloud Sales Engineer at Clumio, and we're just thrilled to have it with us. So, Joe, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Good morning. My name is Joe Ferguson. I am a Cloud Sales Engineer with Clumio. Today's session will focus on identifying key challenges to protecting native AWS workloads and show how a transformational technology like Clumio can simplify your data protection strategy. To lay a quick foundation for the session, I'll provide a brief overview of what Clumio does. Clumio is a SaaS backup and recovery platform built natively in AWS to optimize the data protection strategy of AWS workloads. Clumio has achieved AWS Storage Competency status for its enterprise backup solutions. This is the gold standard designation and recognizes that Clumio provides proven technology capabilities to help customers successfully execute their storage goals on AWS. Additionally, Clumio possesses deep expertise to deliver solutions and proactively utilizes new AWS APIs to provide continuous innovation inside of the platform. As you can see from the diagram, Clumio disaggregates the control plane and data planes to enable better performance and multi-regional capabilities. Clumio deploys stateless resources that can scale to meet customer demand while using data reduction techniques to reduce your cost profile at the same time. Importantly, the stateless data processing architecture allows Clumio to use S3 direct endpoint to transfer customer data, thereby avoiding egress charges. Most customers we have found use AWS's built-in Snapshot Manager. It is a free tool that achieves the fundamental task of capturing point-in-time copies of these data types. But in reality, it's the same concept as an array-based snapshot in the on-premises world. This approach lacks the ability to search through an index catalog to find and restore at a file level. It also lacks the ability to secure the data against account intrusion from a bad actor unless you replicate a second copy of all your data. How does one understand how much space does a specific instance consume, or understand if gaps exist for compliance purposes? This whole problem statement leaves the door wide open for an innovative modern technology to provide the path to true optimization around cloud-native data protection. This is where Clumio steps in. Clumio's creation of an authentic SaaS platform provides a modern serverless design built to scale, built to provide the utmost security around our customers' data, and built to simplify the end-user experience and provide the best visibility around data compliance. Let's walk through a demonstration to compare the difference between AWS Snapshots and Clumio's Discover and Protect platform. To begin, let's start by identifying the most common challenges that our customers face every day. Typically, the most common data sources utilized in AWS are EC2, EBS, RDS, and S3. Let's look at an example of the complexity that is created by simply using snapshots to protect your data in AWS. I'm displaying a list of EBS snapshots in one of my accounts. I have roughly 15 instances in my account, but I have about 650 snapshots in this account. That's a lot of snapshots for only 15 instances. But it's also very representative of a basic 30-day retention policy with monthlies stored for a year and yearlies stored for 7 years. There are three main challenges that I will call out here. 1. The data shown only expresses snapshots for this account region and the specific data type. If I have multiple account regions, which I do, I have a separate list for each that I need to navigate to in order to get information. This only shows me snapshots for EBS. If I have other services, such as RDS or DynamoDB, for example, I have to navigate to those lists as well. And ultimately, in order to create a global view of all my accounts, I would need to export all of these individual lists into spreadsheets and filter them there. The second challenge with this approach is that I have no index or catalog to provide any hints as to the content of these snapshots. Imagine an end user requesting a restore of a file, but is uncertain as to when the file was deleted. There is no way to accomplish this with AWS Snapshots except to load each snapshot one by one into an EBS volume, mount it to an EC2 instance, search for the file. If the file is found, make sure the file is the correct version the user is looking for. And if the file is not found, remove the mount, delete the volume, and repeat the process with the next snapshot. We've had customers tell us this process could take hours to accomplish sometimes. A third note to point out is that this listing of snapshots gives me zero indication of how much space is being consumed. For each account, I receive a bill that aggregates my total snapshot footprint costs, but there's no way to drill down into that more to understand who consumes what inside of that footprint. In this list, AWS simply shows the provision volume size of the instance where the snapshot originated from. Snapshots are incremental, so they definitely are not consuming the space that's shown here. Because of all this, end users are forced to create complicated systems and processes to enforce security around their data protection strategy, keep track of compliance across multiple account, regions, business units, be able to effectively report this back to the business, understand and eliminate excess protection on an instance, and ultimately attempt to script and automate these processes to manage change and growth in the environment. Let's take a look at how modern technology like Clumio addresses the same problem. The user journey starts with education through the use of Clumio Discover. Discover is a free tool that Clumio's platform provides, and anyone who wishes can go to AWS Marketplace and simply deploy it. What Discover effectively does is capture all of the metadata in customer accounts related to existing snapshot footprints for persistent data sources across EC2, EBS, RDS, and DynamoDB. We analyze the metadata and provide the customer an easy-to-consume dashboard that provides a ton of relevant information related to their current snapshot consumption. Let's walk through some of the key things that the tool can provide. On the top of the main dashboard, we will show you a few key metrics. The first metric estimates the monthly cost based on the current footprint that Clumio discovers. Clumio is unique in this regard as we utilize AWS's change block tracking APIs to better understand the incremental sizes of recursive snapshots. The second metric we display is a count of orphan snapshots. These are snapshots that no longer have an EC2 instance associated with them. Clumio provides additional detail on these snapshots in order to help customers understand if there is value in keeping them around. This helps solve the problem around overprotection and helps remove unnecessary cost. The third metric we provide shows snapshots that are older than 30 days. We've had customers run this report and uncover tens, sometimes hundreds of terabytes of older snapshots that could be successfully deleted in their environments. Lastly, we also show instances that do not have any protection at all within the last 30 days. This can help identify potential gaps in your protection strategy. These metrics are further reinforced through some additional charts below that show histograms and trends. The next tab is the Discover Footprint tab. This page allows the customer to filter through a variety of contexts to gain better understanding at more specific levels. Regional footprints, account footprints, business unit footprints, all the way down to an instance level. This is powerful descriptive information. Additionally, we created filtered lists at the bottom of the page, which provide additional detail around the instances or snapshots that we have analyzed. Our footprint history and footprint create pages show trending over time, as well as providing information about snapshot origins. The last piece of education we provide within Discover is a cost analysis tool that evaluates what it would take to create a secure air-gapped copy of all of your snapshots that exist in your account today. The assumption here is that in order to create an air-gapped copy, you have to replicate the local snapshot to another account, possibly within another region, and apply controls over the account. Clumio inherently provides immutable air-gapped, encrypted, and version-controlled backups of EC2, EBS, and RDS data sources. Customers that are looking to address concerns around ransomware and attacks from internal bad actors are typically most interested in Clumio's ability to prevent their backups from getting encrypted or deleted in the event of such an attack. The stateless design and our ability to reduce the data footprint through compression and global deduplication allows Clumio to offer the security advantages of Protect while reducing the customer cost profile that they would normally incur using AWS snapshots. Protect provides some very specific value propositions, which we will now explore in the next portion of the demonstration. The value propositions are built around better data security, as discussed previously, fast granular search and restore capabilities, regional data mobility, and finally, much greater simplicity and visibility around maintaining data compliance. As you can see on the Environments page, Clumio allows customers to onboard accounts from any of the major 4 U.S. regions, as well as Canada. Further expansion is coming shortly. Protection strategies start by creating a definition of how you would like the data to be protected. We offer a simple and easy-to-use policy engine that describes the frequency and retention across your various data types. You can see 2 tabs here. The second tab is simply a layer on top of AWS Backup that orchestrates local snapshots in a customer account. This is currently also a free offering within Clumio. Additionally, the policy allows you to describe what region you want your Clumio secure backups to reside in. Clumio's ability to deduplicate and compress data at the source allows us to efficiently transfer data at a minimal cost, using AWS's border network to different regions within the US. Customers utilize a combined approach where they can have a local snapshot copy for a quick recovery and out-of-region backups for long-term compliance and regional availability. Once a policy is created, it simply gets applied to instances within your AWS account via tags. Clumio employs a full once incremental forever backup strategy and encrypts the data in flight and at rest in both directions, backup and restore. The value Clumio provides beyond the secure air-gapped copy is the functionality the platform enables around data access and data mobility. Let's start by looking at EC2. If I click on an instance, I can see a ton of great information about that instance. I can see all of its AWS attributes with a handy link that will bring me directly to the instance within my AWS console. I can take on-demand snapshots or backups of the instance. I can perform a global search across all of my backups for that instance for a specific file or a set of files. I can also perform the same search through a calendar view with a point-and-click capability through the file tree structure. If I want to restore the entire instance, I have a number of options available to me. I can restore just the underlying EBS volumes associated with the instance. I can restore the instance as an AMI, or I can use the advanced restore function, which gives me additional options. Here I can choose which region I would like to restore my data into. I can change my AMI type. I can apply other attributes to the instance as well. In short, fast, granular search capabilities with flexible restore options. If we look at our approach to RDS, Clumio provides some very unique, differentiated functionality here. At a basic level, we provide integrations into AWS's point-in-time recovery for up to 35 days. We also take a rolling backup copy, which is a full backup stored securely in Clumio's account. This creates a full restore point if the customer loses everything, database and snapshots. Where Clumio's biggest differentiation is shown is our use case around long-term retention of RDS instances for compliance purposes. When Clumio backs up an RDS instance, we have the ability to extract the data and the schema, insert them into Parquet files, and allow the customer to query and retrieve records directly out of the backup. Imagine no longer having a backup bound to an operating system or database engine or version. This methodology also allows customers to quickly get the information they need for an audit without having to download entire instances to simply grab a couple of records. This is most important when the databases have scaled to significant size. All of these functions in the platform are supported by a robust security policy. Clumio supports two-factor authentication, IP allow lists to route access through your VPN only, bring your own encryption keys, multi-user with RBAC and EBAC, and a comprehensive audit log that tracks every user action in the platform. This is exportable to Splunk for long-term retention if so desired. Additional reports around activity and compliance are customizable, exportable, emailable, and schedulable. Finally, we have a built-in metering system. This ensures you only pay for what you use in the platform. And to top it off, we can send your bill directly inside your own AWS bill. To recap, Clumio, through innovative design, is allowing customers to optimize and simplify their data protection strategy in AWS, improve their data security profile, and reduce their cost. Thank you for participating in the demonstration. We will now open up the floor to general questions and answers.
Thanks so much, Joe. We do have time for questions. Before we do, we're going to do a quick poll question that's going to go out to the audience. You should see it pop up right now. The question reads, what cloud is your organization using? Please select all that apply. You can see AWS, of course, Azure, GCP, other cloud, not using cloud but plan within 6 months, or not using cloud yet and time frame is beyond 6 months. So if everyone could just take a quick second and answer that poll question again, select all that apply, and we'll see what the results are and talk about that real quickly. So we'll leave that up for just a second. And then let us know when we're going to go ahead and give it a little bit more time and then push those results. And there we go. There's the result. Joe, is that kind of what you were expecting to see?
Yes, that's actually pretty spot on for what we see, especially here in the Midwest region. A lot of organizations that are heavily tied to Microsoft tend to move more towards Azure footprints, and organizations that are less tied to Microsoft and more, Linux, Unix-based tend to move to AWS, but it's also very service-based as well. Some of them are very specialized in certain things. And so, in fact, a lot of customers are drawn to both. One of the things that we ultimately want to be able to create at Clumio is this idea of cloud arbitration, where backups, whether your data resides in AWS or Azure or GCP, you should be able to back up from one and restore to the other, or store your data from one to the other. So connecting all of the clouds together is part of our vision and our mission statement. Right now, we're very focused on making sure we have a very complete, solid AWS strategy.
We do have some questions that come in. We have quick time for that. Can I buy insurance to cover my cost of recovering from ransomware?
That's actually a really interesting question. It's something that we've been uncovering quite a bit more recently, the idea of insurance or the impact of ransomware beyond the specific data loss or data recovery efforts. One of the things that we have found in our discussions is that insurance is actually very real inside of data loss strategies. You can get reductions around insurance by showing well-architected and properly protected environments. And Clumio can actually help lower those insurance costs. So a lot of times we think about the scope of these events very limited to the bad actor and the recovery efforts, but they really tend to spray out in a lot of different places. And that's one area, certainly, where we have a positive impact around the bottom line, not from just a recoverability perspective, but the auxiliary things that customers typically use to help protect in a larger sense, and insurance is one of those areas.
And I know you said in your presentation that Clumio Discover is in the AWS Marketplace, if I'm not correct, for free, and anyone can download and use that. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yep. So Clumio Discover and Protect is in Marketplace.
And Protect is in there. Is that how you recommend people, is that the best way for people to go about and get their hands on the product, or is there another way? I mean, is that kind of a gateway to get in to use your guys' product?
There are certainly other ways through direct contact with us, but that is by far the easiest, most streamlined method. And you can literally deploy Discover in 5 minutes or less. And typically, most customers start out through that education process, and then they can make better decisions about what we can do for them from a Protect standpoint. But to deploy Discover is free, and even if there's no plans to use Clumio, we found that a lot of customers just really like the information they get out of it because they can't really get it anywhere else today.
Okay, and then just any parting advice?
Yes, I would say don't confuse snapshots with backups. I've been doing this also for 20-some years, and that question was very much in settled law for a while, and with cloud adoption, it seems to be really presenting itself quite a bit, and I'm not sure if it's because the solution alternatives weren't available, but I've seen a lot of trending back towards snapshots. And just remember, you have to get the data outside of your logical security domain for it to be truly protected from an attack.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe, so much for being with us. We really, really appreciate it. So,
thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. And now we're going to move on to our final presenter for the day. And we've had him before. He's wonderful. You're going to learn a whole lot. It's Eric Krusi. He is the Senior Solution Engineer from AvePoint. And Eric, please take it away.
Hello, my name is Eric Krusi, and I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer here at AvePoint. And today we're going to be talking about how you can manage risk in your M365 environment. Now, the first solution that we're going to be showing here today is Insights for Microsoft 365. And this solution is specifically intended to help you identify and take action on risk within your Microsoft environment. So the first thing that we're going to show here is that we have the ability across the different workloads in Microsoft 365 to identify areas that have external users, where there's external links that have sensitive data, and take this type of information and cross-reference it so that we can prioritize and help you as administrators or security officers or risk officers identify those areas that potentially are vulnerable to your organization. So we'll talk a little bit about what these kind of high risk and medium risk items are in a minute here. But essentially what we're doing is we're taking a look at all of the permissions in your environment, all of the areas that have sensitive information, so sensitivity labels in M365 and where those are deployed in your tenant, and also taking some other supplementary information such as where are your guest users, where are your shadow users, and these are users that have access to the underlying content within a team but are not explicitly a member or an owner. Teams without owners, teams with high-risk items, and we're cross-referencing this information to summarize in the form of high risk and medium risk. So let's take a look at what that specifically means. So if we want to look at our high risk items, we can see here that we have different files within our teams. So these are all individual files. And we can see that they have particular sensitivity information. So this one has a telephone number, this one has a credit card number, and we can also see that they have a high exposure level. So they're shared with a large security group or a large Office 365 group. And so by cross-referencing this two information, we have sensitivity and we have a high exposure. This particular file has a high risk level to the organization. So being able to take that information, which natively you would have to typically do a permissions report. You'd also have to find a report on where all the labels are and cross-reference that stuff manually. We're doing that for you automatically and summarizing it to you in a format that's easy to understand and up to date all the time. So again, this is our high risk information within Teams. Let's say I want to do the same thing in OneDrive, right? I can go into OneDrive, I can see all of our high risk items, and I can very easily, again, see what is high risk, where the high risk files are, depending on, again, the sensitivity information and the exposure level of that particular file, who it's shared out with. Now, the way in which we're able to get the permissions so quickly and easily for users and groups, and that we're actually building an index of all your membership and permissions across your entire tenant, no matter how many M365 users you have. So if you have hundreds of users, or you have over 100,000 users, or hundreds of thousands of users, we have you supported and can support and scale to any volume of, again, users and data that you may have in your tenant. So this is all indexed. So if I wanted to, for example, find all the areas that Rita had access across my entire tenant, I can go ahead and do a search. And now from an audit perspective, I can see the entire tenant access that Rita has and show it in a format that's easy to consume and see all the areas that, again, Rita has access to. And I can do it by site. I can also do it by object, right, where all the files, which ones of those have sensitive information in them, so I can sort and filter on this information. So you can also filter. I can also export this out as a report if it's something that you need to share to site owners or your risk department or your security team and take action respectively. Other ways in which we can identify risk, I can see very quickly all the areas that maybe the Everyone group has access. So here I can see the Everyone group has access to 36 site collections and even is being granted access to 30 items. I can also see all the areas that where external links have been granted access and are accessible by external users. And I can also do quick filters, right? So we're all across all those items, show me all the ones that have a sensitivity label of high, right? So again, very quickly, I can see that access. And let's say we want to take action, right? Let's say I wanted to remove that share, right? So beyond just reporting, I wanted to go ahead and remove that sharing with that's anonymous, or I want to set an expiration, right? This one does not have an expiration date. It's set to never. That's not acceptable. Let's go ahead and set an expiration date. So that's something that I can do throughout the user interface. If we go, let's say we wanted to look across our SharePoint Online environment. So we look across teams, we looked across groups. Also, something that we can do is do the same thing against our classic SharePoint sites, as well as our, maybe our communication sites. I can go ahead and look at all the high-risk items. And notice that we can also take action on this, right? So let's say I wanted to, we know that there's a sensitivity label, if there's not one placed on there, I can actually change or apply a sensitivity label. I can view the permissions and actually make changes to it. So let's say, here we see we have external users that are being granted access. I can actually go ahead and come in here and remove their permissions if they shouldn't be in there. So as an administrator, as a content owner, I can come in here and I can make those changes as needed. For those organizations that are large, we can also come in here and we can actually set up different groups, security groups, and security trim these dashboards to specific geographies or specific departments, or we can security trim it by sensitivity label to be able to delegate out this ability to do risk reporting across your different subunits within your organization. So that's really all on the reporting and taking action around risk. We also have in here the ability to create policies to help mitigate that risk automatically. So this is all about automation and being able to make changes through orchestrated policy settings that happen, again, automatically as incidents, or I should say policy violations, take place. So for example, let's say I wanted to create a rule that prevented certain large groups from being granted access to a Microsoft team, or let's say a group. I can actually restrict certain groups from being granted access. Let's say I wanted to prevent the everyone except external users or the everyone group from being granted access. So I can actually block those users from being granted access. Or I could say only, let's say, US based employees are allowed to have access to this financial team, or teams that are classified as financial or sensitive related. I can actually set a defined group and actually go ahead and block and remove any users that don't meet these criteria. Other things we can do is we can actually prevent team owners or group owners from switching from private to public and potentially opening up that entire site up to open to the entire company. So these are just some of the policies that we can do from an automation standpoint to help you feel secure. Once you get these set up, you can then go back to your insight reporting and then ensure and ensure that you have your policies working and your risk being mitigated. So I hope this was helpful in helping you identify potentially areas of risk and how to proactively set up rules and policies to block that risk from coming up in the future. But thank you very much for taking time to look at how AvePoint can potentially assist you and mitigate that risk across your M365 tenant.
Thanks so much, Eric. We do have questions. I think anybody, more than anybody that, Microsoft 365 backup is such a big issue right now. I think every single one of our readers, this is something everyone now has to deal with. So we definitely have questions for you. But really quickly, before we do, everyone stay on the line. Make sure you stay on to the end. Right after this, during this, we'll be doing the drawing for that Surface. So please stay on the line. And Eric, you're there, right? Hi, Eric.
I'm here. Hello.
Hi. Okay, let's go ahead and get to the first question. We've actually got a couple of questions in about this. Can you explain on the sensitivity labels, how does the content get defined as high or medium risk?
Yeah, good question. So within Pulsing Insights, there are ways in which you can, as an organization, define your own risk based on exposure level and also by the sensitivity labels that you are rolling out within your security and compliance center within M365. Now, based on those two different elements, exposure and what type of sensitivity label you are defining and assigning to files, we can use that information to help you define what is high or medium risk. And by defining that, you can prioritize and review risk by highest exposure first and then go down to the medium exposure.
Okay. And another question, how long does it take to get a permissions report for a user or a group?
So actually within Pulsing Insights, it's pretty much instantaneous to be able to get that permissions report, no matter how large your Microsoft 365 tenant is. So if you have 100 users or 100,000 users, there's an index kept of all of that permissions and membership across SharePoint groups and teams. So you can actually pull that information really ad hoc whenever you need it within Pulsing Insights.
Now, I know we have some resources for people to learn more about software they can download right now in their console, but how do you recommend that people get their hands on the software so they can try it out or sign up for a demo? What's the best way?
Yeah, actually, it's very easy to get up and running, and we really do recommend going through the website. You'll see a free trial button in the upper right-hand corner of the AvePoint.com website, so anyone can certainly there and we're also happy any questions you may.
I think your audio went a little different off there, but I think you were saying go to the AvePoint.com website, and there's a button on the top right. I'm looking at it right now. It says free trial. So can you speak again, Eric? Let's see if we've got you back.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So
yeah, I can hear
that
you
button
now.
in the upper right-hand corner.
Okay, great. And again, as you know, this is just an issue. People are really dealing with having to back up their Microsoft 365, content and restore it. And you're dealing with this obviously day in and day out. What would your top tip, recommendation, best practice, what not to do? What's kind of your parting advice for people who are dealing with this day in and day out and maybe, haven't had that time to really delve in and what would be your number one thing you'd recommend?
Yeah, I would say really, pay attention to certainly your
Oh, you're cutting out again. Oh, no. Let's try it one more time.
Just say pay close attention to the limits that are imposed within your tenant, and also, it's also important to make sure that you understand if the business really needs a copy of data. Some of those things are not biased on the native protection labels that you get within your tenant natively. So keep that in mind if you do need that secondary data to help protect against ransomware, malware, or other disaster scenario recovery events.
Great. Eric, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Everybody, if you have more questions for Eric, put them in the console. We will get them over to him. And again, just go to AskPoint.com. They've got that button over on the top right. And again, download those resources. So thank you very much for doing it. And again, we have been doing that drawing for the winner. And on our back end, Olivia, can you send me that name? I think I missed it in our console. So if you can send that over to me, I'll go ahead and announce that winner. So, here we go. So hopefully I'm going to say the last name right. But the winner is going to be, give me 1 second. Here, I'm just trying to focus. It's Smile, S-M-A-I-L, and Sudala at Mediline. I'm sorry, I'm not able to focus right now. Those M-E-D-I-L-I-N-E. So you are the winner of that Surface Pro 7. So we are going to go ahead and we're going to get that to you. Our marketing team is going to reach out right now, and we'll get your contact information and get that out to you. Congratulations on winning our Surface Pro 7. So thank you, everybody, for staying with us. I know we ran a little long. We do appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all of our speakers today, my fellow moderators. Huge, huge thank you to our sponsors, Druva, Metallic, Clumio, and AvePoint. Again, they're underwriting this content. They're sponsoring the community. We can't thank them enough. Thank you so much. Please take that survey at the end. Let us know what you think. The editors read each and every one of your comments, your feedback. We look at every survey. So please do that, and please join us next time. Thanks again, you guys. Have a wonderful Friday.